The stagecoach door swung open, and Marion Locke stepped into the Montana dust with a letter that promised her everything: a husband, a home, a future. But the platform stood empty. No groom, no welcome, just curious stares and pitying whispers. She was a mail-order bride nobody wanted, a package left unclaimed in the summer heat. Just when humiliation threatened to crush her completely, small fingers tugged at her skirt. A barefoot girl with desperate eyes looked up and whispered 4 words that would change everything. "Will you be my mommy?" This is the story of how the unwanted became irreplaceable. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your city or country so I can see how far this story travels. The July sun beat down on Medicine Creek, Montana, with the kind of relentless heat that made even the hardiest ranchers seek shade. Dust devils danced across Main Street, swirling through the gaps between weathered buildings that had stood since the town's founding 20 years prior. The afternoon stagecoach was late, almost an hour now, and the small crowd that had gathered at the depot was beginning to thin. Most folks had better things to do than wait in this oppressive heat for travelers who might not even be coming. But Marion Locke was coming. She was on that stage, though she didn't know yet that her arrival would mark both an ending and a beginning. Inside the cramped coach, Marion pressed her handkerchief against her neck, trying to absorb the perspiration that kept forming despite her best efforts to remain composed. Her dark traveling dress, appropriate for a respectable woman making a cross-country journey, had become a portable furnace. The fabric clung to her back, her corset felt like an iron cage, and her carefully pinned hair had long since surrendered to the humidity, with damp tendrils escaping to stick against her temples. She was 26 years old, which in 1887 meant she'd already been labeled a spinster by polite society. Not that anyone in Boston society had been particularly polite about it. After her father's death 2 years ago, the whispers had started. Poor Marion, no prospects, no fortune, no future. Her mother's passing when she was just 16 had left her alone to care for her ailing father, and by the time he'd finally succumbed to consumption, the eligible bachelors of her youth had all married younger, prettier, more financially secure women. The letter in her reticule had arrived 4 months ago, forwarded through the New England Mail-Order Bride Bureau. Mr. Thomas Harrington of Medicine Creek, Montana, sought a refined woman of good character and moral standing to become his wife. His letter had been stiff but not unkind, describing his dry goods store, his modest home, his desire for companionship. He'd enclosed a photograph, a serious-looking man with dark hair and a neat mustache, standing in front of what she assumed was his establishment. They'd exchanged 3 more letters after that. His had been brief, businesslike, focused on practical matters. Her skills: she could cook, sew, keep books. Her health: excellent, despite her modest means. Her expectations: reasonable, she'd assured him. Hers had been carefully composed, revealing enough to seem genuine while hiding the desperation that had driven her to answer his advertisement in the first place. "I have nowhere else to go," she'd wanted to write in that first letter. "I'm alone in the world, and I'm terrified." But instead, she'd written about her appreciation for hard work, her adaptability, her hope for a partnership built on mutual respect. His final letter had been direct. "Arrive on the July 15th stage. I will meet you at the depot. We will be married by the circuit judge on the 17th. No terms of endearment, no expressions of anticipation, just facts and dates." Still, it had been enough. She'd sold what little her father had left, mostly books and a few pieces of furniture, paid her debts, and purchased a ticket west. Now, as the stagecoach finally rumbled into Medicine Creek, Marion took a deep breath and tried to summon the composure that had gotten her through her father's illness, the poverty that followed, the loneliness of the past 2 years. She smoothed her dress as best she could, tucked the errant hair back into place, and pinched her cheeks to bring some color to her travel-pale face. "This is your new life," she told herself firmly. "Make the best of it." The stage lurched to a stop, and the driver's gruff voice called out, "Medicine Creek, end of the line." The door swung open, and a cloud of dust rolled in, making Marion cough. She gathered her small carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world fit into that single bag in one small trunk strapped to the roof, and accepted the driver's calloused hand as she stepped down onto the platform. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Boston had been warm when she'd left, but this was different. a dry, penetrating heat that seemed to suck the moisture from her lungs. She blinked against the bright sunlight, one hand shading her eyes as she looked around the platform. There were perhaps a dozen people scattered about, an elderly couple collecting packages, a woman with 2 children heading toward a waiting wagon, a few men loitering near the depot building, smoking and talking in low voices. None of them approached her. None of them looked like the serious man in the photograph she'd studied so many times. Marion stood there, carpetbag in hand, and waited. The driver hauled down her trunk and dropped it beside her with a heavy thud. "That's everything, ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim before climbing back up to his perch. "Wait," Marion called up to him. Is this Medicine Creek?" The driver looked at her like she'd asked if the sky was blue. "Sign right there says so, don't it?" He gestured to the faded board nailed above the depot. "Population 237, though Old Man Henderson died last week, so I suppose it's 236 now." "I'm supposed to meet someone here," Marion said, hating how small her voice sounded. "A Mr. Thomas Harrington? He owns the dry goods store?" Something flickered across the driver's weathered face. Surprise? Or maybe pity. "Tom Harrington's store?" He scratched his jaw. "Ma'am, that store's been closed up for near about 6 weeks now." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Closed?" "Tom took sick," one of the loitering men called over, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Bad sick. Doc couldn't do nothing for him. He passed 3 weeks ago. Real shame. He was a decent fellow." The words hit Marion like stones. Dead. Thomas Harrington was dead. The man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry was dead, and apparently no one had thought to inform the mail-order bride he'd sent for. I didn't know," she managed to say. Her fingers tightened on the handle of her carpetbag until her knuckles turned white. "No one wrote to tell me." "Didn't know there was anyone to tell," the man said, not unkindly. "Tom kept to himself mostly, never mentioned sending for a bride." The elderly couple had paused in loading their wagon to stare. The woman with children had stopped as well, one hand on her youngest shoulder, watching with undisguised curiosity. Even the men who'd been so studiously ignoring her arrival were now looking her way with a mixture of pity and speculation. "Mail-order bride, is she?" one of them muttered to his companion, not quite quietly enough. "Poor thing, came all this way for nothing. What's she going to do now?" Marion's cheeks burned with humiliation that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale in the making, the woman who'd been sent for but never claimed, like a package sitting at the depot that no one wanted to collect. She squared her shoulders, determined not to cry in front of these strangers. "Is there a boarding house in town?" she asked, directing her question to the man who'd told her about Harrington's death. He exchanged glances with his companion. "Mrs. Crowley runs one on 3rd Street, he said slowly. "But she's pretty particular about her guests. You got money for a room?" Marion did a quick mental calculation of the coins left in her reticule. After the train tickets and stage fare, she had perhaps $5 remaining, hardly enough for more than a few nights' lodging. "Some," she said carefully. "Might want to ask at the church, too," the woman with children called over. "Reverend Barnes sometimes helps folks who've fallen on hard times." Fallen on hard times. Is that what she was now? A charity case for the local pastor? "Thank you," Marion said stiffly. She picked up her carpetbag with one hand and tried to lift the trunk with the other, but it was far too heavy. The driver had already started his team moving, heading toward the livery stable. The crowd on the platform was dispersing now that the entertainment of her humiliation was complete. "Let me help you with that, miss." Marion turned to find a woman approximately her own age, dressed in a simple calico dress that was far more suitable for the climate than Marion's heavy traveling costume. She had a kind face, sun-weathered but warm, with laugh lines around her eyes. "I'm Alice Porter," the woman said, bending to grab one handle of the trunk. "I work at the general store across the street. Couldn't help but overhear your predicament." "Marion Locke," Marion replied, grateful beyond words for this small kindness. Together they carried the trunk to the shaded boardwalk in front of the depot. "I seem to have made a terrible mistake in coming here." "Not your mistake," Alice said firmly. "Tom Harrington should have written to you when he took sick, or had someone write for him, That's on him, not you. She wiped her hands on her apron and studied Marion with shrewd but sympathetic eyes. You really did travel all the way from back east to marry him? From Boston, Marion confirmed. We'd been corresponding for several months. He seemed like a respectable man. He was respectable enough, Alice allowed, just not much of a romantic, if you know what I mean. Practical to a fault. She hesitated, then added more gently, I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but I can't say I'm surprised he didn't mention sending for a bride. Tom kept his business very close to the vest. Marion sank down onto her trunk, no longer caring about appearances. The full weight of her situation was settling onto her shoulders like a lead blanket. She was stranded in a strange town with no husband, no home, no prospects, and barely enough money to survive a week. The humiliation was complete. What am I going to do? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Alice chewed her lip, clearly thinking. Well, first thing is to get you out of this heat and get some water in you. You look about ready to faint. Then we can figure out your options. I don't have any options, Marion said dully. I don't have enough money to book passage back east, even if I had anywhere to go back to. There's always options, Alice insisted, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as Marion. Maybe, well, there's the hotel. They sometimes need kitchen help, or the church might. Your orphan's causing trouble again, Boone. Both women looked up at the shout. Across the street, outside the livery stable, a commotion was unfolding. A tall man in worn work clothes was trying to saddle a large bay horse while simultaneously keeping hold of a small child, a girl, by the looks of her, though she was so covered in dirt it was hard to tell at first. The child was trying to pull away, her small voice carrying across the dusty street. I ain't going home. I want to stay in town. Josie, we've talked about this, the man said, his voice tight with frustration. You can't just run off every time we come to town. Now get in the wagon. I don't want to be alone, the child wailed. I want to stay with people. That's Boone Mercer, Alice explained in a low voice. Rancher, runs a spread about 5 miles north of here. His wife Clara died birthing that little girl. Must be 3 years ago now. He's been raising Josie alone, and by all accounts, it's not going well. Marion watched as the man, Boone, finally got his horse saddled and lifted the struggling child onto the seat of a nearby wagon. Even from this distance, she could see the weariness in his movements, the defeat in his shoulders. The little girl continued to cry, her small hands reaching back toward the town as if pleading for rescue. Poor mite, Alice murmured. She's starving for affection, anyone can see that. But Boone, well, he's been closed off since Clara passed. Won't accept help from anyone, won't hire a housekeeper, won't even consider remarrying. Just works himself to death and drags that baby around with him everywhere because he can't stand to let her out of his sight. Why won't he hire someone to help with her? Marion asked, still watching the struggling child. Pride, mostly. And stubbornness. Boone was always a hard man, good man, mind you, but hard. When Clara died, something in him broke. He blamed himself, even though Doc said there was nothing anyone could have done. Now he's determined to do everything himself, like accepting help would be admitting defeat. The little girl had gone quiet now, slumped in the wagon seat with her small shoulders shaking. Even her rebellion had been exhausted. Boone climbed up beside her, took the reins, and started the team moving. They headed north out of town, trailing a plume of dust in their wake. Something in that small, defeated figure struck a chord deep in Marion's chest. She knew what it felt like to be alone in the world, to be hungry for connection, to feel like an unwanted burden. She'd lived that existence for 2 years after her father's death. Alice, she said slowly, an idea forming, you said he won't hire a housekeeper? Won't even discuss it. Half the women in Medicine Creek have offered, and he's turned them all down flat. What if... Marion stood up, her exhaustion forgotten. What if someone offered to help with his daughter? Not as a housekeeper exactly, but as a nanny, a governess? Alice's eyebrows rose. You? Why not? I helped care for my father during his illness. I can cook, clean, manage a household, and I clearly need a position. The plan was taking shape in her mind now, born of desperation but not without merit. That child needs someone. Anyone can see that. And I need somewhere to go. Boone would never agree to it, Alice said, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now, as if she was considering the possibility. He doesn't trust strangers, especially not with Josie. Then I'll have to convince him, Marion said with more confidence than she felt. How do I find his ranch? Marion, I don't think this is a good idea. Boone can be difficult. And you don't know anything about ranching or frontier life. You're a city woman. No offense meant. None taken, because you're absolutely right. I don't know anything about this life. Marion picked up her carpet bag, her decision made. But I'm an excellent learner, and I'm out of alternatives. Either I find a way to make myself useful here, or I end up begging for charity from people who've already decided I'm an object of pity. I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. Alice studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You've got spine. I'll give you that. All right, I'll give you directions to the Mercer Ranch, but don't say I didn't warn you when he runs you off his property. Duly noted, Marion said, allowing herself a small smile. Now, about those directions. As Alice explained the route, 5 miles north on the main road, turn east at the lightning-struck cottonwood, follow the creek to the ranch house, Marion felt the first stirring of hope since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed, but it was something. The afternoon was waning now, the brutal heat easing slightly as shadows began to lengthen. Marion knew she should probably wait until morning, should perhaps reconsider this impulsive plan. But the image of that small girl slumped in defeat in the wagon seat wouldn't leave her mind. If I'm not back by tomorrow afternoon, she told Alice, you might want to send someone to check that Mr. Mercer hasn't buried me in his pasture. Oh, don't even joke about that, Alice said, but she was smiling slightly. Here. She pressed something into Marion's hand. It was a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Ham sandwich and some apples. You look like you haven't eaten all day, and it's a long walk to the Mercer place. I can't. Marion started to protest, but Alice cut her off. You can, and you will. Consider it an investment in your success. If you manage to get Boone Mercer to accept help, you'll be performing a miracle this town has been praying for. Marion's throat tightened with gratitude. Thank you, Alice, truly. Thank me by staying alive and getting that little girl some proper care, Alice said briskly. Now go on, before I talk you out of this foolishness. Marion left her trunk at the depot. Alice promised to have her husband bring it out to the ranch if things worked out, and started walking north out of town. The main road was really just a wide dirt track, rutted from wagon wheels and baked hard by the sun. Her city shoes, designed for cobblestone streets and hardwood floors, were ill-suited for this terrain, and she could already feel blisters forming. But she kept walking. The landscape was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Boston had its parks and green spaces, but they were tamed, cultivated, controlled. This was wild country, rolling grasslands stretching to distant blue mountains, dotted with sagebrush and scrub pine. The sky was enormous, so much bigger than the slice of blue visible between Boston's buildings. Despite her exhaustion and uncertainty, Marion felt a strange sense of expansion, as if the landscape was inviting her to become larger, bolder, more than she'd ever been allowed to be back east. She ate the sandwich as she walked, savoring every bite. Alice had been right. She hadn't eaten since early morning, and the food helped restore some of her strength. The apples she saved for later, tucking them carefully into her carpet bag. The lightning-struck cottonwood was exactly where Alice had said it would be. A massive, blackened trunk, split nearly in half, but still defiantly alive, new growth sprouting from its wounded sides. Marion turned east onto a narrower track, following the silvery line of a creek that wound through a small valley. The sun was touching the western horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In other circumstances, Marion might have stopped to admire the beauty. Instead, she pressed on, driven by determination and the sinking feeling that she was already running out of time. The ranch house came into view as she crested a small rise. It was a simple structure, rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney, a covered porch running along the front, a few outbuildings scattered nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in one window. Someone was home. Marion paused, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty, disheveled, her dress wrinkled and stained from travel, her hair falling out of its pins. She'd come to offer herself as a governess to a man who didn't want help, looking like she couldn't even take care of herself. Too late to turn back now, she told herself firmly. She walked up to the house and knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps inside and the door swung open to reveal Boone Mercer. He was taller than she'd expected, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands. His hair was dark brown, long enough to brush his collar, and his face was deeply tanned from years in the sun. He might have been handsome once, but grief had carved hard lines around his mouth and left shadows under his eyes. Those eyes, a startling blue-green, fixed on Marion with surprise that quickly turned to suspicion. "I don't want whatever you're selling," he said bluntly, starting to close the door. "Wait!" Marion put her hand against the door, surprising both of them. "I'm not selling anything, Mr. Mercer. My name is Marion Locke, and I've come to offer my services." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of services?" Heat flooded Marion's cheeks as she realized how that sounded. "As a governess," she said quickly. "For your daughter. I understand she needs someone to care for her while you work." "Who told you that?" The suspicion in his voice deepened. "Alice Porter? Martha Henderson? Which one of those busybodies sent you out here?" "No one sent me. I came of my own accord." Marion lifted her chin, meeting his hostile gaze directly. "I saw you with your daughter in town this afternoon. She seemed unhappy, and I happen to need a position." "I don't need a governess," Boone said flatly. "And I don't appreciate strangers showing up at my door offering to fix problems that ain't theirs to fix. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Papa?" A small voice from inside the house stopped him mid-sentence. The little girl appeared at his side, one small hand clutching his pant leg. Up close, Marion could see she was perhaps 3 years old, with tangled blonde curls and eyes the same blue-green as her father's. Her dress was clean but patched, too small in the sleeves. Her feet were bare, and there was a smudge of something, jam, maybe, on her chin. Those eyes fixed on Marion with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "Who's that lady?" Josie asked. "Nobody," Boone said. "Go back inside, Josie." "She's pretty," Josie said, ignoring her father's command. "Is she coming to stay?" "No, she's not," Boone started, but Josie had already slipped past him onto the porch. The child walked right up to Marion and looked up at her with heartbreaking hope in her expression. "Are you Angel?" she asked seriously. "I prayed for an angel to come." Marion's heart clenched. She knelt down so she was at eye level with the little girl. "I'm not an angel, sweetheart. I'm just a woman who needs a job and who thought maybe your papa might need some help." "I need help," Josie said immediately. She held up one foot. "I got a splinter and Papa can't get it out, and it hurts real bad." "Josie," Boone's voice held a warning note. But Marion was already examining the small foot, gently tilting it toward the lamplight spilling from the doorway. Sure enough, there was a good-sized splinter embedded in the tender pad beneath the child's toes. The skin around it was red and slightly swollen. "That does look painful," Marion said sympathetically. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday," Josie said. "I was playing in the barn without my shoes." Marion looked up at Boone. "Do you have a needle and lamp oil?" "I'm not letting a stranger dig around in my daughter's foot," he said coldly. "Papa tried," Josie said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I cried, and he stopped." Marion could see the frustration and helplessness in Boone's face, the same expression her father had worn when he'd been too weak to do the things he needed to do. She stood slowly, still holding Josie's small hand. "Mr. Mercer, I can see you don't want me here, and I respect that, but that splinter needs to come out before it gets infected. I've had plenty of experience with such things. My father was often ill, and I learned basic medical care from his doctor. Let me remove it, and then I'll leave. You don't have to hire me or even speak to me again. But please, let me help your daughter." For a long moment he just stared at her, and Marion held her breath. Then Josie tugged on his pant leg. "Papa, please? It hurts." Something in his face shifted. Not exactly softening, but the rigid hostility eased slightly. "Fine," he bit out. "But then you leave." He led them inside to a simple kitchen area. The house was clean but sparse. A table and chairs, a stone fireplace with a pot hanging over banked coals, a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was functional, nothing decorative. It felt like a place where people existed rather than lived. Boone produced a sewing needle and a small bottle of lamp oil. Marion washed her hands in the basin by the door, then had Josie sit on the table where the light was better. The child watched her with wide, trusting eyes that made Marion's chest ache. "This might pinch a little," Marion warned gently, "but I'll be as quick as I can." "Okay," Josie whispered. Marion heated the needle briefly in the lamp flame, then cleaned it and the surrounding skin with the oil. Boone stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her every move like a hawk. She could feel his distrust like a physical pressure, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The splinter was deep, but Marion's hands were steady. She'd done this dozens of times for her father, who'd been prone to getting splinters from his woodworking hobby. Josie whimpered once, but didn't pull away, and within 2 minutes Marion had extracted the offending piece of wood. "All done," she announced, showing Josie the splinter. "See? It's out." "It don't hurt no more," Josie said in wonder, wiggling her toes experimentally. Marion cleaned the small wound again and wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth from the supplies Boone had provided. "Keep this on until tomorrow," she instructed, speaking to both father and daughter. "And try to keep it dry and clean. It should heal fine now." "Thank you, miss." Josie threw her small arms around Marion's neck in an impulsive hug that nearly made Marion lose her balance. For just a moment, Marion allowed herself to return the embrace, breathing in the little girl's scent of sunshine and dirt and innocence. Then she gently disentangled herself and stood. "You're very welcome, sweetheart." She picked up her carpet bag and turned to Boone. "Thank you for allowing me to help. I'll be going now." She made it 3 steps toward the door before Josie's voice stopped her. "Wait! Don't go!" Marion turned. Josie had scrambled off the table and was standing in the middle of the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't leave," the child begged, her voice breaking. "Please stay. I don't want you to go like Mama did. Please." Boone moved to his daughter, kneeling beside her. "Josie, we talked about this. That lady has her own life." "I don't care," Josie sobbed. "I want her to stay. I want—" She broke free from her father's grasp and ran to Marion, clutching her skirts with desperate fingers. Those blue-green eyes looked up at Marion with such naked longing that it hurt to see. "Will you be my mommy?" Josie whispered, her small voice barely audible. "Please? I'll be real good, I promise. I won't cry or make noise or nothing. Please, will you be my mommy?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Marion looked from the desperate child to the father, who had gone very still. The lamplight cast shadows across Boone Mercer's face, but she could see the pain there, raw and unhealed. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky. Marion was miles from town with nowhere to go and no one waiting for her. Inside this rough cabin, a broken family was held together by the thinnest of threads. And a little girl with tangled curls was looking at her like she was the answer to all her prayers. Marion took a breath and knelt down, taking Josie's small hands in hers. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I can't be your mommy. You already have a mother, and she loved you very much." "But she's gone," Josie said, her lip trembling. "She's gone, and Papa's always sad, and I'm alone all the time, and—" "Josie," Boone's voice was rough. "That's enough." But Josie wasn't finished. She pulled one hand free from Marion's grasp and pointed at her father. "He don't want nobody here. He makes everybody go away, but I don't want to be alone no more." The words seemed to hit Boone like physical blows. His face went pale, then flushed with what might have been shame or anger or both. "Go to your room," he said tightly. "Now!" "No!" Josie's voice rose to a wail. "You can't make me. You can't make the lady leave. You can't—" Whatever else she might have said was lost as she dissolved into heartbroken sobs. She clung to Marion's dress like a drowning person clings to a life raft, her small body shaking with the force of her crying. Marion did the only thing she could. She gathered the child into her arms and held her, rocking slightly, murmuring wordless comfort. Over Josie's blonde head, she met Boone Mercer's eyes. The look on his face was devastating. It was the face of a man who knew he was failing at the one thing that mattered most and had no idea how to fix it. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "She doesn't usually... She's never..." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have let you stay even this long." "Mr. Mercer," Marion started, but he cut her off. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm a terrible father who can't even comfort his own daughter. And you're probably right. His voice was bitter. But we manage. We get by. I don't need some Eastern lady coming in here thinking she can fix us just because she knows how to pull out a splinter. That's not what I think at all, Marion said quietly, still holding the sobbing Josie. I think you're a man doing his best under impossible circumstances. I think you're exhausted and grieving and trying to be everything to your daughter when you're barely holding yourself together. I don't think that makes you a terrible father. I think it makes you human. He stared at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face, quickly followed by renewed suspicion. You don't know anything about me or my circumstances. You're right, I don't. Marion stood carefully, shifting Josie to her hip. The child had quieted somewhat, though she was still hiccuping against Marion's shoulder. But I know what it's like to feel alone and overwhelmed, and I know that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I didn't ask for help, he said stubbornly. No, you didn't, but your daughter just did. The words hung between them as Josie's breathing slowly evened out. The child was falling asleep against Marion's shoulder, emotionally exhausted. Her small fingers were twisted in the fabric of Marion's dress, even in sleep unwilling to let go. She's falling asleep, Marion said softly. Where should I put her? For a moment she thought Boone would refuse even this, would take his daughter from her arms and send her out into the gathering night. But then he gestured toward a small room off the main living area. In there. That's her room. Marion carried Josie into the small space. It held a narrow bed covered with a faded quilt, a wooden chest, and little else. There were no toys that Marion could see, no dolls or books. The room felt less like a child's sanctuary and more like a monk's cell. She laid Josie gently on the bed and pulled the quilt up over her. The child's eyes fluttered open briefly. Don't go, she murmured. Shh, I'm right here, Marion whispered, smoothing the tangled curls back from Josie's forehead. Go to sleep now. Promise you won't leave? Marion's throat tightened. I promise I'll be here when you wake up, she said, choosing her words carefully. It wasn't quite the promise Josie wanted, but it was all she could honestly give. It seemed to be enough. Josie's eyes drifted closed, and within moments her breathing had evened into sleep. Marion stood there for a few more seconds, looking down at the small, vulnerable face. What had she gotten herself into? She'd come here thinking she could offer her services as a governess, a neat business arrangement that would solve both her problems and this family's. She hadn't expected to feel this tug of connection, this ache of recognition when she looked at this lonely child. When she returned to the main room, Boone was standing by the fireplace, staring into the banked coals. He didn't look up as she entered. She's asleep, Marion said quietly. He nodded but didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but no longer hostile. Marion knew she should leave now, should walk back to town in the darkness and find that boarding house Alice had mentioned. But Josie's small hand had been so tight on her dress, and she'd made a promise. Mr. Mercer, she began carefully, I understand you don't want my help, but your daughter... Don't. He cut her off, his voice rough. Don't tell me what my daughter needs. I know what she needs. She needs her mother. She needs the life Claire and I were supposed to give her. She needs... He stopped, his jaw working. She needs things I can't give her. So give her what you can, Marion said. Give her someone to care for her while you work, someone to cook proper meals and keep the house, and make sure she doesn't get splinters in her feet. That's not replacing her mother. That's just common sense. I've managed fine so far. Have you? The question came out more sharply than Marion intended. She softened her voice. I'm sorry, that was unkind, but Mr. Mercer, from what I saw in town today, and from what I've seen here tonight, I don't think you're managing as well as you believe. And neither is Josie. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but when he finally spoke, his voice was weary rather than angry. And what exactly are you proposing, Miss Locke? That I hire a complete stranger who showed up at my door claiming to be a governess? For all I know, you could be anyone. You could be running from the law, or running from a husband, or... I'm running from nothing except poverty and loneliness, Marion interrupted. I came to Medicine Creek to marry a man I'd never met because I had nowhere else to go. He died before I arrived. I have no family, no home, and barely enough money to survive a week. I'm not a governess, I've never been employed as such, but I can cook, clean, sew, and care for a child. I'm educated, responsible, and desperate enough to walk 5 miles to a stranger's ranch to beg for a position. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. So, yes, I'm asking you to take a chance on a complete stranger, because you need help, and I need a purpose, and your daughter needs someone who can focus on her instead of drowning in grief. The last words came out harsher than she'd meant, and she saw him flinch. But she didn't take them back. Boone turned away from her, bracing his hands against the mantelpiece. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, Marion said, her voice gentling. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you don't lie awake at night wondering how you're going to keep going. Tell me you don't look at your daughter and see your wife's face and feel like you're failing both of them. Tell me you don't need help, Mr. Mercer, and I'll walk out that door right now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, I can't. 2 words. 2 small words that contained an admission of defeat, of vulnerability, of desperate need. Marion waited, barely breathing. Boone's shoulders sagged, as if those 2 words had cost him something vital. I can't tell you those things, because they'd be lies. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. But I also can't just trust some stranger with my daughter. I can't lose her too. She's all I have left. You won't lose her, Marion said softly. But if you keep pushing everyone away, if you keep trying to do everything yourself, you're going to break. And then where will she be? He had no answer for that. Marion pressed what she hoped was her advantage. 1 week, she said. Give me 1 week. Let me stay and help with Josie, keep the house, cook the meals. If at the end of that week you don't think it's working, I'll leave without argument. But at least give me a chance. And where exactly would you stay? He asked, a note of challenge in his voice. I've got 2 bedrooms in this house, and one of them is Josie's. I can sleep in the barn, Marion said immediately, or on the porch. I'm not particular. You can't sleep in the barn like livestock, he said, sounding almost offended. Then I'll sleep on the floor in Josie's room. She seemed comfortable with me. You'll take my room, Boone interrupted gruffly. I'll sleep in the barn. Marion blinked in surprise. Mr. Mercer, I can't. You can, and you will. I'm not having it said that Boone Mercer made a lady sleep in his barn while he took the bed. He rubbed his face tiredly. 1 week, Miss Locke, that's all I'm agreeing to. After that, we'll see. Relief flooded through Marion so intensely that her knees went weak. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. I promise you won't regret this. I'm already regretting it, he muttered, but there was no real heat in the words. He moved to a shelf and began pulling down blankets. I'll get these out to the barn. You'll find nightclothes in the chest in my room. They'll be too big, but they're clean. There's a wash basin and pitcher on the stand. Mr. Mercer, Marion said as he headed for the door, his arms full of blankets. He paused and looked back at her. What made you change your mind? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, when Josie asked you to be her mother, you didn't lie to her. You didn't make promises you couldn't keep. You were honest and gentle, even though it would have been easier to tell her what she wanted to hear. He shifted the blankets in his arms. That tells me you're a woman of integrity, and that's something I can trust, even if I can't trust much else these days. With that, he was gone, leaving Marion standing alone in the lamplight, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, hopeful and naive. Now here she stood in a stranger's house, having somehow talked her way into a position she wasn't qualified for, responsible for a heartbroken child and a grieving father. What have I done? She wondered. But when she looked through the doorway into Josie's room and saw the small form sleeping peacefully under the faded quilt, she felt that tug again, that inexplicable sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She found Boone's room as he'd described. It was as spare as the rest of the house. A sturdy bed, a chest of drawers, the wash basin and pitcher, nothing more. The nightshirt she found in the chest swallowed her, but it was soft and clean-smelling, like it had been dried in the sun. After washing as best she could and changing clothes, Marion lay down on the bed. Through the open window, she could hear crickets singing and the distant call of an owl. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, the quilt soft with age. She thought she'd be too keyed up to sleep, her mind spinning with everything that had happened, all the uncertainties that lay ahead. But exhaustion pulled at her like a tide, and within minutes of closing her eyes, she was asleep. She didn't hear Boone return to the house later, didn't know he stood in the doorway of his former bedroom for a long moment, watching the stranger sleep in his bed. Didn't see the expression on his face. Confusion and wariness mixed with something else, something that might have been the faintest glimmer of hope. All she knew was that when she woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of a child's voice calling, Miss Lady, are you still here?" She opened her eyes to find Josie standing beside the bed, her small face anxious in the dimness. "I'm here," Marion said softly, reaching out to touch the child's hand. "I promised I would be, remember?" Josie's face transformed with relief and joy. "You stayed," she breathed. "You really stayed." "I really did," Marion confirmed. And as the little girl climbed up onto the bed and curled against her side with complete trust, Marion realized that somewhere in the chaos of this impossible day, she'd found what she'd been looking for. Not a husband or a home, but something more essential. She'd found a place where she was needed. The Montana dawn broke cold and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Marion woke to find herself alone in the bed, though the warm hollow beside her and the sound of small feet pattering in the next room told her that Josie hadn't gone far. She dressed quickly in her wrinkled traveling dress, the only one she had until her trunk arrived, and finger-combed her hair into something resembling order before pinning it up. In the main room, she found Josie standing on a chair pulled up to the dry sink, trying to reach a tin cup on a high shelf. The child was still in her nightgown, her blonde curls a wild tangle around her face. "Let me help you with that, sweetheart," Marion said, lifting the cup down. Josie turned to her with a smile that lit up her whole face. "You're really here. I thought maybe I dreamed you." "No dream," Marion assured her, feeling her heart squeeze at the child's obvious delight. "Now, shall we get you washed up and dressed? Where does your papa keep your clothes?" "In the chest in my room. But I can dress myself," Josie said proudly. "Papa taught me." "I'm sure you can," Marion said diplomatically, following the child back to her small room. "But perhaps I could help with your hair. It looks like it might have some tangles." The chest revealed 3 dresses, all well worn and carefully mended, along with 2 sets of undergarments and a single pair of shoes that looked too small. Marion made a mental note to let down hems and perhaps fashion something new from whatever fabric she could find. While Josie dressed herself with the fierce concentration of a 3-year-old determined to prove her independence, Marion examined the room more carefully in the morning light. It was even barer than she'd thought last night. No toys, no books, no drawings pinned to the walls. The only personal touch was a faded photograph on the chest, a woman with dark hair and a gentle smile holding a baby. Clara Mercer, Marion assumed, with infant Josie. "That's my mama," Josie said, noticing Marion's gaze. "Papa says she's in heaven now." "She was very beautiful," Marion said softly. "And you look just like her." "Papa says I got her eyes, but his stubborn streak." Josie struggled with the buttons on her dress. "That means I don't listen good sometimes." Marion smiled despite herself and knelt to help with the buttons. "Well, stubbornness isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it means you're strong." "Are you stubborn?" "Very," Marion admitted. "Otherwise I wouldn't have walked 5 miles to your house yesterday." Josie giggled, and the sound was so pure and unexpected that Marion found herself laughing too. When was the last time she'd laughed like this? Not in the 2 years since her father died, certainly. Maybe not for years before that, when the shadow of his illness had hung over everything. The door to the house opened, bringing with it the smell of morning air and livestock. Boone Mercer stepped inside, stopping short when he saw Marion and Josie in the bedroom doorway. His hair was damp, as if he'd dunked his head in the water trough, and there was hay clinging to his shirt. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. Clearly he hadn't slept well in the barn. "You're up," he said unnecessarily, his voice gruff. "Yes, I hope you don't mind that I've been helping Josie get ready." Marion kept her tone neutral, unsure of his mood this morning. Had he regretted his decision in the night? Was he going to send her away after all? "That's what you're here for," he said, then seemed to realize how harsh that sounded. I mean, that's fine. Good. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I've got livestock to tend to. Breakfast is usually just coffee and whatever bread's left from the day before. I could make something more substantial, Marian offered. If you have eggs and flour, I could. We're not fancy folk, Miss Locke. Simple food suits us fine. I wasn't suggesting fancy, Marian said, keeping her voice even despite the rebuff. Just nutritious. A child needs more than bread and coffee. Something flickered across his face, defensiveness mixed with what might have been shame. She gets fed proper at supper. I'm sure she does. I only meant… Papa, I'm hungry, Josie interrupted, tugging on her father's sleeve. Can the Miss Lady make pancakes? Mama used to make pancakes. The silence that followed was painful. Boone's face went rigid, and Marian could practically see him retreating behind those walls he'd built. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Your mama's gone, Josie. We've talked about this. I know, but Miss Locke can make whatever she finds in the kitchen, he said, cutting off his daughter's protest. I've got work to do. He turned on his heel and strode back outside, the door closing behind him with more force than necessary. Josie's lower lip trembled. I made him sad again. No, sweetheart, Marian said quickly, kneeling beside the child. You didn't make him sad. He's sad because he misses your mama, just like you do. That's not your fault. But I shouldn't talk about her. It makes his eyes go all wrong. The matter-of-fact way Josie said this broke Marian's heart. What kind of life was this for a child, learning to suppress her memories and questions because they caused her father pain? You can talk about your mama with me any time you want, Marian said firmly. And maybe, after a while, your papa will be ready to talk about her too. Sometimes grown-ups need more time to heal than children do. You won't get sad? I might, Marian admitted honestly, but that's okay. Being sad sometimes is part of remembering people we love. Josie considered this seriously, then nodded. Mama made the best pancakes. They had blueberries in them when we had blueberries. And she would make a smiley face with the syrup. That sounds wonderful, Marian said. Now, let's see what we can find for breakfast, shall we? The kitchen yielded more supplies than she'd expected. There was flour, though the barrel was getting low. Eggs from the chickens she could hear clucking outside. A precious bit of sugar, some salt, baking powder that might still be good. A few withered apples in a basket, and tucked in the back of a shelf, a small jar of what looked like preserved berries. Are these blueberries? Marian asked Josie, holding up the jar. The child's eyes went wide. Mama made those last summer before she got sick with me in her belly. Nearly 3 years old then. Clara Mercer must have preserved these berries while pregnant with Josie, never knowing she wouldn't live to see her daughter grow. Marian felt the weight of that tragedy as she turned the jar in her hands. Should we use them? She asked gently. Or would you rather save them? Josie bit her lip, clearly torn. Then her small shoulders straightened with decision. Mama would want us to use them. She always said food was meant to be eaten, not looked at. Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman, Marian said. All right then, blueberry pancakes it is. The process of making breakfast became a lesson in adaptation. The cook stove was different from the one Marian had used in Boston, burning hotter and more unpredictably. The mixing bowl had a crack poorly mended with wire. The griddle was seasoned with years of use, its surface pocked with memories of past meals. But Marian had always been resourceful. She mixed the batter while Josie dragged a chair over to watch, asking a constant stream of questions. How much flour? Why did they need eggs? What made the pancakes fluffy? Marian answered each query patiently, grateful for the distraction from her own anxious thoughts. When the first pancake hit the griddle with a satisfying sizzle, Josie clapped her hands. It smells like when Mama cooked. The door opened again, and Boone entered carrying a pail of fresh milk. He stopped when he saw them at the stove, something unreadable crossing his face. Marian braced herself for another rebuff, but he simply set the milk on the table and moved to wash his hands in the basin. Pancakes will be ready in a few minutes, Marian said, keeping her tone neutral. I found eggs and some preserved berries. Those berries? Boone started, then stopped. His jaw worked, and Marian could see the internal struggle. Clara put those up. I know, Josie told me. She said her mother would want them used. Marion flipped the pancake, pleased to see it was golden brown. But if you'd prefer we save them. No. His voice was rough. No, Josie's right. Clara always did hate waste. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. She'd probably be disgusted that I let them sit on the shelf this long. It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name without flinching, Marion noticed. She slid the first batch of pancakes onto a plate and set them on the table, then poured coffee for Boone and milk for Josie. The child climbed into her chair, eyeing the pancakes with delight. Can I have syrup and a smiley face? She asked hopefully. Boone's hand tightened around his coffee cup, but his voice was steady when he answered. We don't have any syrup, baby girl. Used it all last month. I could make some, Marion offered, returning to the stove to pour more batter. If you have sugar and water, I can make a simple syrup. You know how to do that? Josie asked, impressed. My father had a terrible sweet tooth, Marion said with a small smile. I learned to make syrup and jam and all sorts of things to satisfy it. The memory of her father's face lighting up over a simple dessert brought a bittersweet pang. He especially loved apple butter in the fall. Mama made apple butter, Josie said around a mouthful of pancake. She put cinnamon in it. That's the proper way, Marion agreed, pleased the child was eating with such enthusiasm. Cinnamon and a bit of nutmeg, if you have it. She cooked the remaining batter and assembled the makeshift syrup, then sat down to eat her own breakfast. The pancakes were good, not perfect, but serviceable. The preserved blueberries were tart and sweet, their flavor intensified by time. For several minutes, the only sounds were eating and the occasional clink of cutlery against plates. Boone cleared his plate with steady determination, as if eating were merely another chore to be completed. But when Josie asked for seconds, and he saw how much the child was enjoying the meal, something in his expression softened fractionally. You're a fair hand at cooking, he said grudgingly to Marion. Thank you. She refilled his coffee without asking, noting how tired he looked. Did you sleep at all last night? Some. It was clearly a lie. I'm used to early mornings. Papa sleeps in the barn lots, Josie announced, even before the Miss Lady came. Sometimes he stays out there all night when he gets sad. Josie, Boone's voice held a warning. But it's true, Papa. You do. Marion kept her expression carefully neutral, but her heart ached at this revelation. How many nights had this man exiled himself to the barn, unable to face the memories in his own house? And what had that been like for Josie, waking alone in the darkness? Mr. Mercer, she said carefully, if my presence here is making things more difficult— It's not your presence, he interrupted, then stopped himself. After a moment, he continued more quietly. I appreciate the breakfast. Josie clearly enjoyed it. That's what matters. It wasn't exactly a warm declaration of acceptance, but it wasn't another rejection either. Marion decided to take it as progress. After breakfast, Boone disappeared to work on whatever tasks required his attention. There was always work on a ranch, Marion was learning. She cleaned the kitchen while Josie helped, which mostly involved getting in the way in the endearing manner of small children. The child chattered constantly, a steady stream of observations and questions that might have been exhausting if it weren't so clearly born of loneliness. Here was a little girl who'd been starved for conversation, for attention, for the simple pleasure of someone listening to her. Can we go see the chickens? Josie asked after Marion had washed and dried the last dish. I like the chickens. They're funny. I think that sounds lovely, Marion agreed. But first, let's do something about your hair, shall we? Josie's hand went self-consciously to her tangled curls. Papa tries to brush it, but it hurts. I'll be gentle, Marion promised. I had long hair when I was a girl, and my mother taught me all the tricks for getting tangles out without tears. She found a comb in Boone's room, a carved wooden one that had probably belonged to Clara, and settled Josie in front of her. The child's hair was badly matted in places, evidence of many days of inadequate care. But Marion worked patiently, starting at the ends and gradually working her way up, talking softly all the while to distract from any discomfort. You have beautiful hair, she told Josie. These curls are lovely. When we get the tangles out, they'll shine like gold. Mama had straight hair, Josie said. Dark, like nighttime. Papa said I got the curls from his mama, who I never met because she lives far away in a place called Illinois. Illinois, Marion corrected gently. That is indeed far away. Do you have a mama? I did, Marion said, working through a particularly stubborn knot. She died when I was 16, and my father died 2 years ago. So you're an orphan too, Josie said with satisfaction. Just like me. I suppose I am, Marion agreed, struck by the simplicity of the child's logic. Though we're both lucky we have people who care about us. You have your papa, and I have new friends now. Like you. Josie turned to look up at her, nearly dislodging the comb. Are you my friend? I'd like to be, Marion said honestly. Good. Josie turned back around. I never had a friend before. Just Papa, and he's too sad to play most times. The casual heartbreak of that statement made Marion's hands still for a moment. What kind of childhood was this, with no playmates, no laughter, no joy, just a grieving father and the ghosts of happier times? Well then, Marion said, resuming her work with renewed determination, we'll have to fix that, won't we? Friends play together. They tell stories and sing songs and have adventures. What kind of adventures? Josie asked, excitement creeping into her voice. All kinds. Exploring adventures, baking adventures, garden adventures. Oh! An idea struck her. Does your father have a garden? There's a place behind the house where Mama used to grow things. But nothing grows there now. Papa says he doesn't have time for it. Marion filled that information away. A garden would serve multiple purposes. Fresh food, of course, but also a project to share with Josie. A way to teach the child useful skills while spending time together. And perhaps eventually, a way to bring some life back to this place where grief had deadened everything. There, she announced, running the comb smoothly through Josie's now detangled hair. All finished, and you hardly cried at all. I didn't cry even a little bit, Josie corrected proudly. She touched her hair wonderingly. It feels soft. That's because it's properly brushed now. Marion divided the massive curls into 3 sections. Would you like braids? They'll keep your hair neat while you play. Mama used to braid it, Josie said wistfully. But Papa don't know how. Then I'll teach him, Marion said, weaving the sections together with practiced ease. But for now, let's go meet those chickens you mentioned. The chicken coop was behind the house, a ramshackle structure that looked like it was held together by hope and a few strategic nails. But the chickens inside were healthy enough, pecking at scattered grain and clucking contentedly. Josie's whole demeanor changed around the birds. She became gentle and careful, speaking to them in a soft voice as she scattered feed. This one's Henrietta, she said, pointing to a plump red hen. And that's Margaret, and the mean one over there is Susan. She pecks if you're not watching. You've named them all? Marion asked, charmed. Mama named them. Before. Josie's face grew solemn. Papa don't like me to talk to them too much. He says they're for eating and eggs, not for loving. Well, I think you can appreciate something for what it provides while still being kind to it, Marion said diplomatically. There's no harm in having names for the chickens. They collected eggs together, 7 brown ones and 2 white, a good haul. Josie carried the basket like it contained precious jewels, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. On the way back to the house, they passed the plot of land Josie had mentioned, what had once been Clara's garden. It was heartbreaking to see. The remains of a fence, mostly fallen down now, dried stalks of what might have been tomatoes last season, weeds choking everything. But the soil looked good underneath all the neglect, and the location was ideal, southern exposure protected from the worst winds by the barn. Could we make it grow again? Josie asked, following Marion's gaze. I think we could, Marion said slowly, already planning. It would take work, and we'd need seeds, but yes, I think we could bring this garden back to life. Would Papa let us? That was the question, wasn't it? Marion straightened her shoulders. Let's go ask him. They found Boone in the barn, mending a broken harness. He looked up warily as they approached, as if expecting trouble. Marion realized he was probably used to Josie's endless questions and demands, all the needs of a young child that he was struggling to meet alone. We collected the eggs, Marion announced, gesturing for Josie to show him the basket. 7 brown and 2 white. That's good, Boone said, his attention returning to his work. Should be enough for a few days if we're careful. Mr. Mercer, I wanted to ask you about the garden plot behind the house. His hand stilled on the leather. What about it? Josie tells me it was your wife's garden. I was wondering if you'd mind if we tried to restore it. Nothing elaborate, just some basic vegetables for the table. Potatoes, carrots, beans, maybe some squash if the season isn't too far advanced. That garden's dead, he said flatly. Has been for 3 years. The garden is neglected, Marian corrected gently. That's not the same as dead. The soil is still good, the location is ideal, and with some work, I don't have time for a garden, Miss Locke. In case you haven't noticed, there's plenty else that needs doing around here. I wasn't suggesting you do the work, Marian said, keeping her voice reasonable despite his sharp tone. Josie and I could manage it. It would be good for her. Children need purposeful activity, and gardening teaches patience and responsibility. What Josie needs is to learn not to get her hopes up about things that don't matter. The bitterness in his voice was like acid. Marian felt Josie shrink against her side, and she put a protective hand on the child's shoulder. With respect, Mr. Mercer, I disagree. What Josie needs is to learn that life continues, that new things can grow, that loss doesn't mean the end of everything. A garden is more than just food. It's a symbol of hope. We're not a philosophical establishment, Miss Locke. We're a working ranch, and I don't have the luxury of symbolic gestures. Then think of it practically, Marian shot back, her patience fraying. Fresh vegetables mean better nutrition for your daughter and less money spent at the general store. Seeds cost almost nothing, and the labor is free since I'm already here. What possible objection could you have to that? They stared at each other across the dusty barn, tension crackling between them. Josie's small hand found Marian's, squeezing tight. The child's breathing had quickened, and Marian realized she was frightened of her father's anger, frightened that this tentative new peace would shatter, frightened of losing the first person in years who'd shown her genuine kindness. Boone must have seen it too because his expression shifted. The hardness remained, but something else crept in. Guilt, maybe, or shame. He set down the harness and rubbed his face with both hands. Fine, he said tiredly. Do what you want with the garden. Just don't expect me to help, and don't come crying to me when the rabbits eat everything. It wasn't exactly an enthusiastic endorsement, but Marian knew better than to push her luck. Thank you, she said simply. We'll stay out of your way. She turned to leave, Josie still clutching her hand, but Boone's voice stopped them. Miss Locke. She looked back. His jaw worked, as if the words were fighting their way out against his will. Clara loved that garden. She could make anything grow, even in this God-forsaken dirt. She'd spend hours out there, and she'd come in with her hands filthy and her face sunburned, talking about the tomatoes or the beans like they were her children. His voice had gone rough. When she died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Every plant that withered felt like losing her all over again. Marian's throat tightened. I understand, she said softly. And I'm not trying to replace what she built or diminish what she meant to this family. I'm just trying to help Josie have something to nurture, something to hope for. If that's too painful, it's all painful, Boone interrupted. Every damn thing about this life is painful now. But you're right that Josie needs more than I've been giving her. He picked up the harness again, not meeting their eyes. Just be careful with her. She's already lost one person she loved. I won't have her hurt again. I'll do my best, Marian promised. And then, because she sensed he needed to hear it, I know you're trying, Mr. Mercer. I know you love your daughter, even when it's hard to show it. That's not nothing. He didn't respond, but the set of his shoulders eased slightly. Marian took that as her cue to leave. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of domestic activity. Marian swept and scrubbed, learning the rhythms of the house. She discovered that the pump outside needed priming each time, that the stove drew better if you opened the damper just so, that mice had gotten into the flour barrel and half the supply was ruined. She made a mental list of everything that needed fixing, replacing, or replenishing, a list that grew alarmingly long. Josie was her constant shadow, helping in the way of small children, which meant mostly creating more work. But Marian didn't mind. She answered questions, told stories, and taught the child a counting rhyme her own mother had taught her. When Josie grew tired, Marian fashioned a nest of blankets on the floor where the little girl could nap while Marian worked. Lunch was leftover pancakes and fresh milk. Supper was stew made from what she could find: potatoes, carrots, an onion, and some salted beef that was tough but edible. Boone ate without comment, cleaning his plate in that same methodical way, as if taste were irrelevant and food merely fuel. But when Josie announced that she'd helped cut up the carrots, she'd really only supervised, but Marian let her take the credit. Boone's expression softened fractionally. "That right?" he said. "Well, they're real good carrots, Josie girl." The smile that lit up his daughter's face was like sunrise, and Marian saw Boone's breath catch. How long had it been since he'd seen her smile like that? After supper, Marian heated water for baths. She bathed Josie first in the tin tub she found hanging in the barn, washing the accumulated dirt from small fingers and behind small ears, scrubbing the tangles from hair that had been neglected too long. Josie splashed and played, delighted by the novelty of having someone's full attention during this ritual. "Do you like stories?" Marian asked as she worked soap through the blonde curls. "I love stories, but Papa don't know many, and I can't read yet." "Can't read yet," Marian corrected gently. "That's easily fixed. I'll teach you." "Really?" Josie twisted around to stare at her, sloshing water onto the floor. "You'd teach me to read?" "Of course, every child should learn to read. It opens up whole worlds." Marian rinsed the soap from Josie's hair. "We'll start with the alphabet, and before you know it, you'll be reading stories on your own." "What kind of stories?" "All kinds. Fairy tales, adventures, stories about brave girls who go on quests and solve mysteries." Marian lifted Josie from the tub and wrapped her in a towel. "For tonight, though, I'll tell you one. How about the story of the princess who befriended a dragon?" Josie's eyes went wide. "Dragons are scary." "This one was scared too," Marian said, guiding the child toward her bedroom. "He was just a baby dragon who'd gotten lost, and he needed someone brave enough to help him find his way home." She tucked Josie into bed and told the story, making it up as she went along, weaving in lessons about kindness and courage, and not judging by appearances. Josie listened with rapt attention, interrupting occasionally with questions or observations. By the time the princess and the baby dragon had found the dragon's family and said their goodbyes, Josie's eyelids were drooping. "Will you tell me another story tomorrow?" the child mumbled sleepily. "Every night," Marian promised, smoothing the freshly braided hair. "As many stories as you want." "I'm glad you came," Josie whispered. "I prayed and prayed for someone, and then you came." Marian's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I'm glad I came too, sweetheart." She stayed until Josie's breathing evened into sleep, then quietly left the room. Boone was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him, staring at nothing. He looked up when she entered. "She asleep?" "Yes, she was exhausted. Today was full of excitement for her." He nodded slowly. "I heard you telling her a story about a dragon." "I hope you don't mind. I thought it might help her settle." "Clara used to tell her stories," he said, his voice distant. "She had a whole book of fairy tales, but she liked making up her own better. She'd do different voices for all the characters, make Josie laugh." He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. "I'm no good at that kind of thing." "Stories aren't everyone's gift," Marian said carefully, "but there are other ways to show a child you love them." "Are there?" The question was bitter. "Because I feel like I'm failing at all of them." Marian poured herself coffee and sat down across from him, uninvited but sensing he needed someone to talk to, even if he didn't know it yet. "You're not failing, Mr. Mercer. You're surviving. There's a difference." "That's a generous way to put it." "It's an honest way to put it." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Grief is exhausting. It takes everything you have just to keep breathing, keep moving, keep existing. You've done that while also running a ranch and caring for a child. That's not failure. That's extraordinary strength." He let out a harsh laugh. "Strength. Right. I haven't gone a single day without thinking about ending it all, without wondering if Josie would be better off with someone, anyone, else raising her. That's not strength, Miss Locke. That's cowardice." The raw confession hung in the air between them. Marian's heart clenched at the pain in his voice, the self-loathing. She chose her next words carefully. Thinking about it and doing it are very different things, she said quietly. The fact that you're still here, still fighting for your daughter, even when everything feels impossible, that's the opposite of cowardice. That's love. Love. He said the word like it tasted bitter. I loved Clara, loved her from the moment I met her, loved her every day we had together. And it didn't matter. She died anyway, screaming in pain, begging me to save her, and I couldn't do a damn thing except watch. His hands clenched into fists on the table. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in love anymore. Love didn't fail you, Mr. Mercer. Life did. Death did. The unfairness of the universe did. But love? Marion leaned forward, willing him to hear her. Love is what's kept you going. Love is what won't let you give up on Josie. Love is what makes you sit out in that barn at night rather than let her see you falling apart. You may feel broken, but your love for your daughter is whole, and that matters. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, so quietly, she almost missed it. How are you so sure? Because I've been where you are, Marion said simply. After my father died, I spent months wishing I could follow him. I was alone, broke, terrified. Every day felt impossible. But I kept waking up, kept surviving, because deep down I believed there had to be more to my story. That my father wouldn't have wanted me to give up. She paused. And I was right. I'm here now, and I'm needed. My story wasn't over, it was just turning a new page. Boone was silent for a long time, his coffee forgotten, his gaze fixed on some point past her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I don't know how to be what she needs. I don't know how to be both parents. I don't know how to make her laugh or tell her stories or braid her damn hair or... All I know how to do is work and try not to drown in missing Clara. Then learn, Marion said gently. You don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. That's why I'm here, not to replace her mother, but to help you find your way through this. To give you space to grieve while making sure Josie has what she needs. You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Mercer. You just have to keep trying. He looked at her finally, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in those blue-green eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faintest possibility of it. You really believe that? He asked. I do. He nodded slowly, then stood abruptly, as if uncomfortable with the vulnerability he'd shown. I should get some sleep. Morning comes early. He hesitated at the door. Thank you for today, for helping with Josie, for the meals and the stories, and... He trailed off, seeming unable to find words for all the small kindnesses Marion had provided. It's what I'm here for, Marion reminded him gently. Right. Well, good night, Miss Locke. Good night, Mr. Mercer. She watched him disappear into the darkness, heading for the barn again, despite her presence freeing up his own bed. Old habits, she supposed, or perhaps he still couldn't face sleeping in the room he'd shared with Clara. Marion cleaned up the supper dishes, banked the fire, and made her way to Boone's room. The bed felt less strange tonight, the house less foreign. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, where city lights drowned out all but the brightest. She thought about the day, about all the small victories and the larger challenges still ahead. Josie had smiled, had laughed, had eaten a good meal, and gone to bed clean and cared for. Boone had opened up, just a crack, letting her see the raw grief beneath his harsh exterior. The garden plot waited, full of potential. It wasn't much, measured against the mountain of healing this family needed, but it was a start. As sleep pulled her down, Marion's last conscious thought was of Josie's whispered words. I prayed and prayed for someone, and then you came. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Marion rose with the dawn, started the stove, and prepared breakfast while Josie clung to her side like a small shadow. Boone ate quickly and disappeared into his work, returning only for meals and the occasional brief exchange about supplies or household needs. He still slept in the barn, though Marion noticed he sometimes lingered in the doorway at bedtime, listening to her tell Josie stories. The garden became their project. On the second day, Marion and Josie began clearing the weeds, working in the early morning before the heat became oppressive. Josie attacked the task with fierce determination, her small hands pulling at stubborn roots while Marion used a rusty hoe she'd found in the barn. They worked side by side, and Marion taught Josie simple songs to pass the time, work songs her own mother had sung while doing laundry or preparing meals. "What's that one about?" Josie asked after Marion finished a verse about a mockingbird. "It's about a parent who loves their child so much they'd give them anything, even the stars from the sky if they could reach them," Marion explained, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. Josie considered this seriously. "Papa would give me stars if he could." "I think you're right," Marion agreed, her heart squeezing at the simple faith in the child's voice. "But he can't reach them because he's too sad to climb that high." The observation was so astute, so heartbreakingly accurate, that Marion had to swallow hard before responding. "Maybe someday he won't be so sad. Sadness doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will." "You promise?" "I promise to do everything I can to help," Marion said carefully. "But some things take time, sweetheart. Your papa's heart is very hurt, and hurt hearts heal slowly." They returned to their work, and Marion let the conversation drift to lighter topics. What vegetables they might plant, what colors the flowers would be, whether the rabbits Boone had mentioned were clever enough to outsmart a fence. On the morning of the fourth day, Marion woke to raised voices outside. She dressed hurriedly and found Boone standing in the yard facing a well-dressed man on horseback. Even from the porch, she could see the tension in Boone's shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "I'm telling you for the last time, Blackwell, I'm not selling," Boone said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The man on the horse, Blackwell, was perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and an air of casual authority that spoke of wealth and power. His clothes were too fine for a casual morning ride, his saddle trimmed with silver. He smiled down at Boone, but there was nothing friendly in the expression. "Be reasonable, Mercer. This land hasn't turned a real profit in 3 years. You're barely holding on. I'm offering you a fair price, more than fair, considering the circumstances. The circumstances being that my wife died and you think that makes me desperate enough to sell my family's land?" Boone's voice rose. "You can take your fair price and—" "Papa?" Josie had appeared at Marion's side, her small voice uncertain. "Why is Papa yelling?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Marion said quietly, though unease was settling in her stomach. "Stay here with me." Blackwell's gaze shifted to the porch, his eyes moving from Josie to Marion with uncomfortable intensity. "Well now," he said slowly. "I heard rumors you'd taken in a woman. Eastern lady, they said, but I confess I thought it was just more of Alice Porter's gossip." His smile widened. Seems the rumors were true. "Miss Locke is my daughter's governess," Boone said sharply. "Not that it's any of your concern." "A governess? How civilized?" Blackwell's tone suggested he didn't believe it for a moment. "You must be quite the progressive rancher, Mercer, hiring help when you claim you can't afford to meet your debts." "I don't have debts with you, Blackwell. I paid off that loan 6 months ago." "Did you?" "I'll have to check my records. Memory's a funny thing. Sometimes numbers get confused." Blackwell's horse shifted restlessly, sensing his rider's mood. "But that's not why I'm here. I came to make a neighborly offer. Your north pasture borders my land and I could use the extra grazing. Name your price." "It's not for sale. Nothing here is for sale. Now get off my property before I help you off." Blackwell's genial mask slipped, revealing cold calculation beneath. "You're making a mistake, Mercer. A man in your position can't afford to make enemies, especially not when you've got a child to think about." His gaze flickered back to Josie. "Accidents happen on ranches. Fires, stampedes, children wandering off and getting lost. It would be a shame if something happened because you were too stubborn to accept a generous offer." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marion felt Josie press closer against her legs, and she wrapped a protective arm around the child's shoulders. Boone had gone very still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. "Are you threatening my daughter?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm simply pointing out that ranching is a dangerous business. You know that better than anyone, don't you? After all, your wife died right here, screaming for help that never came." Blackwell's smile was poisonous. I'd hate to see history repeat itself. Boone moved so fast Marion barely saw it. One moment he was standing in the yard, the next he'd grabbed Blackwell's leg and yanked him from the saddle. The older man hit the ground hard, the breath whooshing from his lungs. Before he could recover, Boone had hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward his now spooked horse. "You listen to me, and you listen good," Boone snarled, his face inches from Blackwell's. "You come near my daughter, you come near my property, you even think about either one, and I will end you. I don't care about your money or your connections or whatever power you think you have. You threaten what's mine, I'll put you in the ground. Are we clear?" Blackwell stumbled back, fury and fear warring on his face. He grabbed his horse's reins with shaking hands. "You'll regret this, Mercer. Nobody threatened Silas Blackwell. Nobody. Get out." Blackwell mounted clumsily and wheeled his horse around. Before riding off, he looked once more at the porch, his gaze cold and calculating. "Enjoy your new governess while you can," he called back. "I wonder how long she'll last when she realizes what kind of man she's working for." He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving Boone standing alone in the yard, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Boone turned and saw Marion and Josie on the porch, and the fury drained from his face, replaced by something worse: shame. "Josie, go inside," he said quietly. "But Papa—" "Inside. Now." The sharpness in his voice made Josie flinch. She looked up at Marion with frightened eyes, and Marion gave her a gentle nudge toward the door. "Go on, sweetheart. I'll be right there." Once Josie had disappeared inside, Marion descended the steps to where Boone stood. Up close, she could see he was shaking, though whether from anger or fear she couldn't tell. "Who was that man?" she asked. "Silas Blackwell. Owns the biggest spread in the county. Been trying to buy my land since before Clara died." Boone's voice was flat, emotionless. "He's the kind of man who's used to getting what he wants. And when he doesn't, he makes sure you regret it." Boone finally met her eyes. "You should go, Miss Locke. Pack your things and head back to town. I'll pay you for your time, give you enough to get passage back east if that's what you want. But you need to leave." "Because of him?" Marion heard the steel in her own voice. "Because some bully in expensive clothes made threats?" "Because those weren't empty threats. Blackwell has connections. The sheriff, half the merchants in town, probably the judge too. He can make life very difficult for anyone who crosses him." Boone's jaw clenched. "And I've just crossed him about as hard as a man can." "Then it's a good thing I'm not easily frightened," Marion said calmly, though her heart was racing. "You should be frightened. This isn't some Boston social snub, Miss Locke. This is a man who could burn my barn, poison my well, or worse, and face no consequences." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "I won't have you and Josie caught in the middle of this." "We're already in the middle of it," Marion pointed out. "Running away won't change that. And frankly, Mr. Mercer, Josie needs me now more than ever. She just watched her father be threatened, watched a stranger make ugly implications about her mother's death. Do you really think abandoning her right now is what's best?" "What's best is keeping her safe." "Then we'll keep her safe together." Marion crossed her arms. "I'm not leaving unless you physically throw me off this property, and I don't think you'll do that." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Boone looked like he wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. Finally, he shook his head. "You're as stubborn as Josie said." "I'll take that as a compliment." Marion's voice softened. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you want to protect us. But you can't do this alone. Whatever trouble Blackwell brings, we'll face it together. That's what families do." "We're not a family," he said, but there was no conviction in the words. "Aren't we?" Marion gestured toward the house. "I cook your meals, care for your daughter, keep your home. You provide shelter and protection. Josie calls me Miss Lady, but looks at me like I hung the moon. If that's not family, I don't know what is." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Before he could respond, a shout from inside the house made them both turn. "Miss Lady! Miss Lady, come quick!" They ran toward the house, Boone reaching the door first. Inside, they found Josie standing by the window, pointing outside with a shaking hand. "The chickens! Something's wrong with the chickens!" Marion hurried to look. The chicken coop door stood open, and birds were scattered across the yard, squawking in distress. Several were missing entirely. Marion counted quickly and came up 3 short, including the plump red hen Josie had called Henrietta. "Stay here," Boone commanded, already moving toward the door. But Marion was right behind him. "I said stay." "And I said we're in this together," Marion interrupted. "Josie, you stay inside and lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except your father or me. Understand?" Josie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Henrietta's gone. Someone took Henrietta." Marion's heart broke at the anguish in the child's voice, but there was no time for comfort now. She followed Boone outside, scanning the area for threats. The morning was eerily quiet except for the agitated chickens. The coop door hadn't been broken. It had been opened deliberately. And there, in the dust near the entrance, was a boot print too large to be Boone's and far too fresh to have been there yesterday. "Blackwell," Boone said, his voice like gravel. "Or one of his men. He wanted to send a message." "He certainly did that." Marion knelt to examine the print more closely. "This is deliberate intimidation, Mr. Mercer. He's trying to scare you into selling." "It's working." Boone's fists clenched. Josie loved those chickens. She named them, talked to them, treated them like pets. And now we show her that we don't let bullies win, Marion said firmly, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. "We round up the remaining chickens, secure the coop properly, and we keep going. We don't give him the satisfaction of seeing us break." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple." Marion started toward the scattered chickens. "Come on, let's get these birds secured before we lose any more." Working together, they managed to coax the frightened chickens back into the coop. Boone reinforced the door with a heavy board and a length of rope. It wouldn't stop a determined thief, but it would at least slow them down. The missing hens, including Josie's beloved Henrietta, were nowhere to be found. When they returned to the house, Josie was waiting by the window, her small face pressed against the glass. She opened the door before they reached it, her eyes searching Marion's face. "Did you find her? Did you find Henrietta?" Marion knelt down, taking both of Josie's small hands in hers. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Henrietta and 2 others are gone, but we saved the rest, and your papa made the coop stronger so nothing else can get in." "But who took them?" Josie's voice rose. "Why would someone steal our chickens?" Marion glanced at Boone, who looked away, his jaw tight. She turned back to Josie. "Sometimes people do mean things because they want something and think being mean will help them get it. But the important thing is that we don't let mean people change who we are or stop us from taking care of what we love." "I want Henrietta back," Josie sobbed, throwing herself into Marion's arms. "She was my favorite. She was the nicest one, and she let me pet her, and now she's gone like Mama's gone, and everything good goes away." The words ripped through Marion's heart. She held Josie close, rocking her gently while the child cried. Over Josie's head, she saw Boone's face contort with pain and helpless rage. He looked like he wanted to punch something or someone. "Not everything good goes away," Marion said softly into Josie's hair. "I'm still here. Your papa's still here. We have 6 chickens left to take care of. We have each other. And we have a garden starting to grow where nothing grew before. That's not nothing, Josie. That's something worth holding on to. But I miss Henrietta. I know you do, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry when you lose something you love." Marion pulled back slightly to look into Josie's tear-stained face. "But after we cry, we keep going. We take care of the chickens who are left. We make sure they're safe and loved. That's how we honor Henrietta, by protecting what she left behind." Josie hiccuped, considering this. "Like how Papa takes care of me because Mama can't." The simplicity of the connection nearly undid Marion. "Exactly like that," she managed. Boone made a strangled sound and turned away abruptly, his shoulders rigid. Marion wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but Josie still needed her. She compromised by keeping one hand on the child while reaching out with the other to touch Boone's arm. "Mr. Mercer," she said gently, "this isn't your fault." "Isn't it?" His voice was raw. "I brought this on us by refusing to sell. I made Blackwell angry. I put my pride above my daughter's safety. How is that not my fault?" "Because standing up to a bully is never wrong. Because teaching your daughter that home is worth fighting for is never wrong. Because refusing to be intimidated is never wrong. Marion's grip tightened on his arm. You did the right thing, even though it came with a cost. That's what courage looks like. He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her breath catch. I can't protect you both. I can't be everywhere at once. If something happens to either of you because of my stubbornness, then it happens, Marion interrupted quietly. Life is risk, Mr. Mercer. I could have stayed in Boston and starved to death in a boarding house alone and forgotten. Instead, I'm here, where I'm needed, where I matter. That's worth the risk, and I think you know it. Before he could respond, a knock at the door made them all jump. Boone moved immediately, positioning himself between the door and Marion and Josie. Who is it? It's Alice Porter, Boone. I brought Miss Locke's trunk like I promised, and I've got news from town. The tension eased fractionally. Boone opened the door to reveal Alice and her husband, a stocky man with kind eyes and graying hair. They carried Marion's trunk between them, setting it just inside the door. Heard you had some trouble with Blackwell this morning, Alice said without preamble, her gaze moving quickly over them all, assessing. Word travels fast. Half the town's talking about how you threw him off his horse. He had it coming, Boone said flatly. Won't get an argument from me. Silas Blackwell's been a thorn in this county's side for 20 years. Alice's husband, Tom, Marion remembered, nodded agreement. But you should know he's been in town all morning, telling anyone who'll listen that you're dangerous, unstable, unfit to raise a child. Josie whimpered, and Marion pulled her closer. That's absurd. Course it is, Alice said. But that won't stop people from talking. Blackwell's claiming he came out here as a concerned neighbor and you attacked him unprovoked. He's saying that little girl ain't safe with a violent father and a mysterious stranger taking care of her. He threatened my daughter, Boone said through gritted teeth, right in front of Miss Locke, implied that accidents might happen if I didn't sell to him. Tom whistled low. That sounds like Blackwell, but proving it's another matter. It's your word against his, and he's got friends in positions that matter. What are you saying? Marion asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. Alice and Tom exchanged glances. We're saying you should be prepared, Alice said carefully. Blackwell's got influence with the territorial judge. If he makes a complaint about Josie's welfare, there could be an investigation. They might even temporarily remove her from the home while they look into things. No. The word burst from Boone like a gunshot. No one's taking my daughter. I'll die before I let that happen. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Tom said. But you need to be smart about this, Boone. Make sure everything here is beyond reproach. The house, the child's care, your behavior. Give them no ammunition to use against you. That's partly why we came, Alice added, looking at Marion. No offense, Miss Locke, but a young unmarried woman living in a widower's house, even as a governess, looks improper to certain minds, especially minds looking for impropriety. What are you suggesting? Marion asked, though she thought she knew. I'm suggesting you might want to stay in town with me for a while, just until this blows over. It would look more proper and— No, Boone interrupted. Miss Locke stays here. Josie needs her. Boone, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. My daughter just lost her favorite chicken because of Blackwell's games. She's terrified and crying, and the one person who's been able to comfort her these past few days is Miss Locke. I'm not taking that away from her. Not for appearances, not for propriety, not for anything. Alice opened her mouth to argue further, but Marion spoke first. I appreciate your concern, Alice, truly, but Mr. Mercer is right. Josie needs stability right now, not more upheaval. I'm staying. Even if it costs you your reputation? Alice pressed. Even if it makes things harder for Boone? My reputation was already in tatters the moment I arrived in Medicine Creek as an unclaimed mail-order bride, Marion said quietly. And as for making things harder, I think we're well past worrying about that, don't you? Alice studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Locke. I haven't decided which. Perhaps both, Marion said with a slight smile. Tom cleared his throat. Well, if you're determined to stay, then you should know Blackwell's also been spreading rumors about the ranch itself, saying it's falling apart, that Boone can't manage it, that the child's living in squalor. This house is clean and well maintained, Marion said immediately. The child is fed, clothed, and cared for. Anyone who investigates will see that. Will they? Alice gestured around the sparse room. I'm not saying you haven't done wonders in a few days, but look at this place with a stranger's eyes. No curtains on the windows, barely any furniture, that crack in the wall over there. A child with only 3 dresses to her name and shoes that don't fit. A father who sleeps in the barn instead of his own house. Each observation was like a small blow. Marian hadn't thought about how it would look to outside eyes, had been too focused on immediate needs to consider appearances. But Alice was right. A judge or investigator looking for problems would find plenty to criticize. Then we fix it, Marian said firmly. We get curtains and proper furniture. We make new clothes for Josie. We make this house look like a home instead of a way station. With what money? Boone asked bitterly. I'm barely keeping ahead of expenses as it is. With creativity and hard work, Marian replied. I can sew. I'll make curtains from whatever fabric we can find or trade for. Alice, do you know anyone in town who might have outgrown children's clothes that Josie could have? Or fabric scraps? I can make something from almost nothing. I might know a few people, Alice admitted. And I've got some material in my sewing room that's just sitting there. I could bring it by. What about furniture? Tom asked. That's harder to come by. The barn, Boone said suddenly. There's furniture in the back of the barn. Claire's things. Her sewing table, a rocking chair, some shelves. I haven't been able to look at them. But if it helps Josie stay with me, then... He swallowed hard. Then we'll bring them in. Marian saw what that admission cost him and felt a rush of respect for his willingness to face his pain for his daughter's sake. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Don't thank me yet. You'll have to be the one to sort through it all. I can carry things, but I can't. He trailed off, jaw working. I understand, Marian said gently. I'll handle it. Alice and Tom stayed for another hour, discussing strategy and sharing what they knew of Blackwell's movements. Apparently he'd been consolidating power in the county for years, buying up smaller ranches and forcing out anyone who resisted. Several families had already left, unable to withstand the pressure of mysterious accidents and economic sabotage. Why doesn't anyone stop him? Marian asked. Who's going to? Tom replied. The sheriff's on his payroll. The judge owes him money. Most of the merchants depend on his business to survive. Anyone who stands up to him ends up ruined or run out of town. That can't be legal. Legal and right aren't always the same thing out here, Miss Locke. This is still rough country in a lot of ways. The law is what powerful men say it is. Tom's expression was grim. Boone's one of the few who've held out this long. That's why Blackwell's so determined to break him. After they left, the house fell into subdued quiet. Josie had cried herself into exhaustion and fallen asleep on the floor, curled up on a blanket like a small, wounded animal. Boone carried her to her bed with surprising gentleness, his large hands careful as he tucked the quilt around her small form. She used to sleep through anything, he said softly, staring down at his daughter. When she was a baby, Clara would joke that a stampede wouldn't wake her. Now every little sound makes her jump. She's been through a lot, Marian said from the doorway. Loss and change, and now this trouble with Blackwell. It would make anyone anxious. She's 3 years old. She should be playing and laughing, not afraid in her own home. His voice hardened. This ends. Whatever it takes, I'm ending this. We're ending this, Marian corrected, and we'll do it smartly, not rashly. Blackwell wants you to lose control, to give him ammunition. We won't give him that satisfaction. Boone looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. You could walk away right now, go back to town, find some other position with a nice, boring family with no dangerous enemies. I could, Marian agreed, but I won't. Why not? She thought about how to answer, about all the reasons swirling in her mind and heart. Finally, she settled on the simplest truth. Because this is where I'm needed. Because Josie asked me to stay, and I don't break promises to children. Because you're fighting for something that matters, and I'd rather stand with you than run from bullies. She paused. And because, for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I belong somewhere. I'm not ready to give that up. The silence stretched between them, weighted with unspoken things. Then Boone nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head. All right then. We do this together. But if things get dangerous, really dangerous, you get Josie out. Promise me. I promise to keep her safe, Marion said carefully. Whatever that requires. It wasn't quite the promise he'd asked for, but it seemed to satisfy him. They left Josie sleeping and went outside to begin the work of securing the ranch. Boone showed Marion the weak points in the property, the broken fence line on the western boundary, the old well that needed a new cover, the barn doors that didn't latch properly. I've been meaning to fix these things, he admitted. Just never seemed to be enough hours in the day. Then we'll make the hours, Marion said practically. Show me what needs doing, and I'll help. They worked through the afternoon, Boone repairing while Marion held boards or fetched tools. It was hard physical labor that left her hands blistered and her muscles aching, but there was something deeply satisfying about it too. Each nail driven, each board secured, was a small victory against the chaos threatening to overwhelm them. As the sun started its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Boone set down his hammer and looked around at their progress. The barn doors now closed securely. The chicken coop had been reinforced. The garden fence, which they'd expanded to include the growing plot, stood straight and strong. Not bad for an afternoon's work, he admitted grudgingly. Not bad at all, Marion agreed, examining her blistered palms with rueful pride. Though I think I'll feel this tomorrow. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Boone's face. City hands aren't used to real work. These city hands just helped you secure half your property, Marion retorted. I'd say they're adapting just fine. This time the smile lasted a full second before disappearing. I suppose they are. They walked back to the house together as twilight deepened around them. Josie was awake, sitting at the window watching for their return. When she saw them, her face lit up with a relief so profound it made Marion's chest ache. You came back, Josie exclaimed, running to meet them at the door. I woke up and you was both gone, and I thought maybe you left me like... She stopped herself, but they all knew what she'd been about to say. Like Mama did. Boone knelt in front of his daughter, his large hands gentle on her small shoulders. Josie girl, listen to me. I will never leave you. Never. Not for anything or anyone. You understand? But Mama didn't want to leave. She would have stayed if she could have. His voice cracked. But I choose to stay, every day. I choose you, and I'm not going anywhere. Josie threw her arms around his neck, and Boone gathered her close, his eyes squeezed shut against tears. Marion looked away, giving them this moment of private grief and reassurance, her own eyes stinging. When they pulled apart, Josie turned to Marion. Are you staying too? As long as you need me, Marion promised. Forever? The word hung in the air, impossible and perfect. Marion knelt beside Boone, taking one of Josie's small hands. Sweetheart, I can't promise forever because I don't know what the future holds. But I can promise today and tomorrow and every day after that until you don't need me anymore. I'll always need you, Josie said with the absolute certainty of childhood. Then I suppose I'll be here a very long time, Marion said softly. That night, after Josie had been fed and bathed and tucked into bed, with another story about the princess and her dragon friend, Marion and Boone sat at the kitchen table making lists. Things they needed to do to make the house investigation-proof. Ways to protect the property from further sabotage. Contingency plans if Blackwell escalated. We should probably expect him to try something during the night, Boone said, adding night watch to his list. That's when cowards do their worst. Then we take turns watching, Marion suggested. You can't stay awake around the clock, and neither can I. But between us, we can keep an eye on things. You do that? Lose sleep to watch for trouble? I've already told you, Mr. Mercer, we're in this together. That means all of it. The work, the worry, the watching. Marion set down her pencil. Besides, I'm a notoriously light sleeper. Always have been. They continued planning until the lamp oil burned low and exhaustion made the words blur on the page. Finally, Boone stood and stretched, his spine cracking audibly. You take first watch, he said. I'll spell you at midnight. Don't try to be a hero if you see something suspicious. Wake me immediately. Agreed. And Mr. Mercer? He paused at the door. We're going to get through this. All of us. Together. He looked at her across the dimly lit kitchen, this Eastern woman who'd walked into his life 4 days ago and somehow become essential to it. I'm starting to believe you might be right, Miss Locke. It was the closest thing to hope she'd heard from him, and Marian held on to it like a lifeline as he disappeared into the night and she settled into her vigil by the window, watching for whatever dangers the darkness might bring. The watch passed without incident, though every shadow seemed to hold threats and every sound made Marian's heart race. When Boone came to relieve her at midnight, she was wound tight as a spring, her eyes burning from staring into the darkness. "Anything?" he asked quietly, careful not to wake Josie. "Nothing concrete, though I could have sworn I saw someone near the tree line around 11. But when I looked harder, there was nothing there." Marian rubbed her tired eyes. "Might have been my imagination. Or it might have been Blackwell's men testing our alertness." Boone moved to the window, his presence solid and reassuring. "Get some sleep, Miss Locke. I'll keep watch until dawn." Sleep came reluctantly, filled with uneasy dreams of burning barns and missing children. Marian woke to pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee brewing. She found Boone at the stove, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. "Anything happen?" she asked, pulling her borrowed robe tighter against the morning chill. "Quiet night, thankfully." He poured coffee into 2 cups, handing her one. "But I found fresh tracks near the barn. Someone was definitely out there circling the property. They didn't try anything, just watched." The knowledge that they'd been observed while they slept sent ice down Marian's spine. "What do we do?" "We stay vigilant, and we move forward with making this place look like a proper home." He drained his coffee in one long swallow. "After breakfast, I'll bring Clara's things in from the barn. Might as well face it." The morning routine unfolded as it had for the past few days, Marian cooking while Josie helped in her enthusiastic, chaotic way. But today there was an undercurrent of tension, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. Even Josie seemed to sense it, staying closer to Marian than usual, her questions quieter and less frequent. After they'd eaten and cleaned up, Boone disappeared into the barn while Marian and Josie began clearing space in the main room for the furniture. They pushed the small table against one wall and swept the floor clean, creating an open area near the window. When Boone emerged carrying a rocking chair, Marian's breath caught. It was beautiful, carved maple with a high back and gentle curves, polished by years of use. Even dusty and cobwebbed, its quality was evident. "Clara's mother made this," Boone said, setting it down carefully. "She rocked Josie in it every night when she was a baby. Said the motion helped calm her." Josie approached the chair slowly, one small hand reaching out to touch the armrest. "I remember," she said softly. "Mama would sing while she rocked, songs about stars and angels and going to sleep." Boone's jaw tightened, but he didn't retreat. "That's right, baby girl. She had a voice like honey, your mama did." "Can I sit in it?" Josie asked hesitantly, as if afraid the answer would be no. Boone looked like he wanted to refuse, to keep this piece of Clara separate and untouchable. But then he glanced at Marian, saw the encouragement in her eyes, and nodded. "Go ahead." Josie climbed into the chair, her small body dwarfed by its size. She pushed with her feet, setting it rocking, and a smile broke across her face. "It feels like Mama's arms," she whispered. The raw emotion on Boone's face was almost too much to witness. He turned abruptly and strode back to the barn, leaving Marian and Josie alone with the chair and its memories. Over the next hour, he made several more trips, a small sewing table with a drawer full of threads and needles, shelves that he mounted on the wall, perfect for displaying dishes or books, a wooden trunk painted with flowers, containing linens and quilts that smelled of cedar and lavender. Each item was another piece of Clara being restored to the house, another acknowledgement that she had existed here, had loved here, had mattered. The last item was a framed sampler, cross-stitched in neat letters, "Home is where love dwells." Clara's work, Marian realized, noting the date stitched in the corner, 1883, the year before Josie was born. "Where should this go?" Boone asked, holding it awkwardly as if it might burn him. "Above the mantel," Marian suggested gently, "where everyone can see it." He hung it there, his movements careful and precise. When he stepped back to look at it, his shoulders sagged slightly. "She made that the winter after we were married. Said every home needed a reminder of what mattered most." "She was a wise woman," Marian said. She was. Boone touched the frame lightly. And she would have liked you, I think. You've got her practicality, her determination, her kindness with Josie. The comparison was both humbling and terrifying. I'm not trying to replace her. I know that. He turned to face her fully. But you're helping us live again instead of just surviving. That's something Clara would have wanted. She always said life was for living, not for mourning. Before Marion could respond, the sound of horses approaching made them both tense. Through the window, they saw 3 riders coming up the path, Sheriff Morrison and 2 men Marion didn't recognize. Stay with Josie, Boone commanded, already moving toward the door. Keep her inside. Marion gathered Josie close as Boone stepped onto the porch. The sheriff dismounted, a portly man with a drooping mustache and cold eyes that assessed everything with calculating precision. His companions stayed on their horses, hands resting conspicuously near their sidearms. Boone Mercer, the sheriff said without preamble. I'm here on official business. There's been a complaint filed regarding the welfare of your daughter. Filed by who? Boone's voice was dangerously calm. Silas Blackwell? The identity of the complainant is confidential, but serious allegations have been made about the conditions here and your fitness as a parent. The sheriff pulled a paper from his coat. I'm authorized to inspect the premises and interview the child. The hell you are, Boone crossed his arms. You got a warrant for that? Don't need one for a welfare check. Now, you can cooperate and let me do my job, or I can come back with a court order and remove the child immediately while we investigate. The sheriff's smile was unpleasant. Your choice. Marion could see the fury building in Boone's rigid posture. She moved quickly, positioning herself in the doorway with Josie behind her. Mr. Mercer will, of course, cooperate, Sheriff. We have nothing to hide. The sheriff's gaze shifted to her, his expression openly skeptical. And you would be? Marion Locke. I'm employed here as Josie's governess. Governess? He said it like it was a dirty word. Funny, I heard you were something else entirely. A mail-order bride who got stood up and latched onto the first lonely widower you could find. Heat flooded Marion's face, but she kept her voice steady. I am employed in a legitimate position, caring for Mr. Mercer's daughter. My personal circumstances are irrelevant to Josie's welfare. That's so? Well, we'll see about that. The sheriff pushed past Boone onto the porch. Let's have a look inside. There was nothing to do but allow it. Marion stepped aside, keeping Josie pressed against her skirts. The sheriff entered slowly, his eyes moving over everything with methodical suspicion. He took in the rocking chair, the shelves now holding dishes, the sampler above the mantel. He opened cupboards and peered into corners, searching for evidence of neglect or impropriety. In Josie's room, he examined her small wardrobe, the made bed, the photograph of Clara on the chest. He even looked under the bed, as if expecting to find something incriminating. Josie whimpered, and Marion squeezed her hand reassuringly. Where does the child sleep? He asked Marion. In her own room, as you can see. And where do you sleep, Miss Locke? The implication was clear and insulting. In Mr. Mercer's former room. He has been sleeping in the barn to maintain propriety. How convenient. The sheriff moved to Boone's room, poking through the simple furnishings. He opened the chest of drawers, lifting out Marion's few belongings with no respect for privacy. When he found nothing objectionable, his mouth tightened. Back in the main room, he fixed his attention on Josie. Come here, girl. Let me look at you. Josie shrank back against Marion's legs. I don't want to. Wasn't asking what you wanted. Come here. You're frightening her, Marion said sharply. If you want to examine Josie, do so with her father present and with some basic kindness. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You're awfully bold for someone in your position, Miss Locke. A woman of questionable morals living in sin with... That's enough. Boone's voice cut through the room like a whip. He'd followed them inside and now stood between the sheriff and Marion, his hands clenched into fists. You've seen the house. It's clean, well-maintained, suitable for a child. My daughter is fed, clothed, and cared for. You've got no grounds for any complaint. I'll be the judge of that. The sheriff crouched down to Josie's level, and Marion had to force herself not to pull the child away. Now, little girl, tell me, does your papa hurt you, hit you, lock you up when you're bad? Josie's eyes went wide with confusion and fear. Papa don't hurt me. Papa loves me. What about this woman? She treats you right? Miss Lady is nice. She tells me stories and makes good food and helps with my splinter. Josie's voice was trembling now, tears threatening. Why are you asking mean questions? Just doing my job. The sheriff stood, his knees creaking. Child seems healthy enough, I'll grant you that. But this living arrangement? He gestured at Marion. An unmarried woman and a widower under the same roof? That's improper at best, immoral at worst. Then arrest me for immorality, Boone said flatly. But you're not taking my daughter. I'm not here to take her, not today anyway. The sheriff moved toward the door. But mark my words, Mercer, you're being watched. One slip, one hint of impropriety or neglect, and I'll be back with that court order faster than you can spit. And next time I won't be asking permission. He left, his companions following in his wake. Through the window, they watched the three men ride away, dust trailing behind them like a threat. The moment they were out of sight, Josie burst into tears. Why was he so mean? What did we do wrong? Boone scooped her up, holding her tight against his chest. Nothing, baby girl. You did nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and sometimes they use children to hurt each other, but it's not your fault. Are they going to take me away? Josie sobbed into his shoulder. Like they took Henrietta? No. Boone's voice was iron. No one's taking you anywhere. I promise. But over Josie's head his eyes met Marion's, and she saw the fear there. They both knew that promise might be beyond his power to keep. After Josie had cried herself out and fallen into an exhausted sleep in her father's arms, Boone carried her to bed. When he returned to the main room, his face was set in grim lines. This is worse than I thought, he said. Blackwell's not just trying to scare us. He's building a legal case to take Josie away. He can't do that. There are no grounds. But even as she said it, Marion felt doubt creeping in. In a fair world, you'd be right, but this isn't a fair world, and Blackwell owns the sheriff and the judge. If he wants to manufacture grounds, he'll find a way. Boone paced the small room like a caged animal. And the worst part is, he's using our own defense against us. Having you here protects Josie, but it also gives them ammunition about impropriety. Then what do we do? Send me away? Marion heard the desperation in her own voice. Leave Josie without proper care just to satisfy people's sense of propriety? No. The word was absolute. You stay. Josie needs you, and I won't sacrifice her well-being for appearances. He stopped pacing and faced her directly. But we need to be smarter, more careful. Give them nothing they can twist into evidence against us. Agreed. And we should document everything. Keep records of meals, activities, education. Show that Josie is thriving under our care. Our care, Boone repeated softly, as if testing the words. When did it become our? When you let me stay, Marion said simply. When you trusted me with your daughter. When we started facing this together instead of separately. He held her gaze for a long moment, something shifting in those blue-green eyes. You could still leave, you know. This is only going to get worse before it gets better. Blackwell won't stop until he has what he wants. Then he'll be disappointed, Marion said firmly, because I'm not going anywhere. A knock at the door made them both jump. Boone moved to answer it, one hand on the gun at his hip. But it was only Alice Porter, her arms full of fabric and her face concerned. Saw the sheriff riding away, she said, pushing past Boone into the house. Figured I'd better check on you all. Is Josie all right? Frightened but unharmed, Marion told her. The sheriff inspected the house and questioned her. He found nothing wrong, but he made it clear this isn't over. Damn Blackwell and his scheming. Alice set down her bundle on the table. Well, I brought what I promised, fabric for curtains and clothes, and I've got news from town that might help. What kind of news? Boone asked warily. The kind where Blackwell might have overplayed his hand. Alice's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Turns out he's been spreading his complaints far and wide, telling anyone who'll listen about the terrible conditions out here. But Martha Henderson's boy works at the general store, and he heard Blackwell pressuring Tom Harrington, back when Tom was alive, to sell his store. When Tom refused, his supplies started arriving late or damaged. Same pattern as what's happening to you. Can anyone testify to that? Marion asked, hope stirring. Martha's willing to swear to what her son told her, and there are 3 other families who've left the county in the past 2 years under similar circumstances. If we could get them to come back and tell their stories— They won't, Boone interrupted. They left because they were scared. Why would they come back and make themselves targets again? Because maybe they're tired of running. Because maybe if enough people stand together, Blackwell's power isn't as absolute as it seems. Alice pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Look, I'm not saying it'll be easy, but right now Blackwell's winning because everyone's isolated. Everyone's facing him alone. What if we change that? Marion felt something click into place in her mind. A coalition. Multiple families coming forward together, supporting each other's testimony. There's safety in numbers. And legal weight, Alice added. One complaint against Blackwell is easy to dismiss. 10 complaints showing a pattern of harassment and intimidation? That's harder to ignore, even for a corrupt judge. It's also a good way to make more enemies, Boone pointed out. Anyone who stands with me becomes a target too. Some things are worth being a target for. Alice stood and began unpacking her bundle, laying out fabrics in various colors and patterns. Now, we came here to make this house look proper, so let's do that while we talk strategy. Marion, you said you could sew? What followed was a strange afternoon of domestic work intertwined with plotting. Marion measured windows while Alice shared names of families who might be willing to testify. They cut fabric while discussing legal strategies. Boone sat at the table cleaning his rifle, ostensibly maintaining his weapons but clearly listening to every word. When Josie woke from her nap, she joined them, helping to sort buttons and thread. The normalcy of it seemed to calm her, the familiar rhythm of women's work providing comfort after the morning's trauma. Marion taught her to thread a needle, praising her concentration, while Alice told stories about her own daughter's attempts at sewing when she was young. Made a sampler once that was supposed to say, "God bless our home," Alice recalled with a laugh. But she got the letters mixed up and it said, "God bless our hone." We hung it anyway, and every time someone asked what a hone was, she'd say it was a special kind of blessing for sharpening knives. Even Boone smiled at that, and Josie giggled, some of the tension leaving her small shoulders. These moments of lightness felt precious, stolen from the darkness pressing in around them. By evening, they'd completed 2 sets of curtains for the main room windows. The fabric was simple calico, but it transformed the space, making it feel more finished and intentional. Marion hung them while Boone held the ladder steady, very aware of his presence below her, ready to catch her if she fell. "They look good," he admitted when she climbed down. "Makes it feel more like a home?" Marion suggested gently. "Yeah, like a home." Alice stayed for supper. A stew Marion had started that morning, rich with vegetables from the supplies Alice had brought. They ate together at the table, a makeshift family bound by circumstance and determination. Josie chattered about her day, about the curtains and the sewing and the story Marion had promised for bedtime. "A new one?" Josie asked hopefully. "Not the dragon one again?" "How about a story about a brave little girl who saved her village from a terrible winter?" Marion suggested. "Did she have magic?" "She had something better, courage and cleverness and a kind heart." "That sounds good." Josie leaned against Marion's arm, content and secure in a way that made Marion's chest ache with protective tenderness. After Alice left with promises to start reaching out to the other families, Marion went through the bedtime routine with Josie while Boone cleaned up from supper. She told the promised story, making it up as she went, weaving in lessons about perseverance and community. Josie listened with rapt attention, asking occasional questions or adding her own details. "The girl had blonde hair like me," she insisted. "She absolutely did," Marion agreed, tucking the quilt around her, golden as sunshine. "And she was brave even when she was scared? Especially when she was scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right even when you're frightened." Josie considered this seriously. "Like Papa being brave about Mama being gone?" "Exactly like that." "And like you being brave to stay when the mean man came?" Marion's throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. Like that too." "I'm glad you're brave," Josie whispered, her eyes already drooping. "I don't want you to go away." "I'm not going anywhere," Marion promised, smoothing the blonde curls back from Josie's forehead. She stayed until the child's breathing evened into sleep, then quietly left the room. Boone was standing at the window, staring out into the gathering darkness. "You've got first watch again," he said without turning. "I'll take over at midnight like last night." "Actually, I was thinking we should alternate shifts differently. 3 hours each instead of 6. That way, neither of us is exhausted. Marion moved to stand beside him. We need to be sustainable in this, not heroic. Sustainable, he repeated, something wry in his tone. Never thought of vigilance as something that needed to be sustainable. Everything needs to be sustainable if it's going to last, and this situation could last weeks or even months. Marion watched his reflection in the window glass. We have to pace ourselves. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight his features were softer than usual. You've got an answer for everything, don't you, Miss Locke? Not everything, but I'm good at practical problems. She managed a small smile. Emotional ones are harder. Tell me about it. He was quiet for a moment, then, about what the sheriff said this morning, about the living arrangement being improper. It doesn't matter what he thinks. It matters if it gives them ammunition to take Josie. Boone's jaw tightened. I've been thinking about it all day. There might be a way to make it more proper. Legally proper, I mean. Something in his tone made Marion's heart start to race. What are you suggesting? He didn't meet her eyes. I'm suggesting that if you and I were married, even just on paper, it would solve the propriety problem. You'd be Josie's stepmother instead of just a governess. No one could claim impropriety then. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through Marion's carefully maintained composure. Mr. Mercer, are you proposing marriage? I'm proposing a solution to a legal problem, he corrected, still not looking at her. This wouldn't be a real marriage, not like what you came here expecting with Harrington. It would be a business arrangement. You'd have legal standing as Josie's guardian, I'd have proof of a proper household, and Blackwell would lose his best weapon against us. Marion's mind reeled. Part of her recognized the practicality of his suggestion. He was right that it would strengthen their position. But another part, the part she'd been trying not to acknowledge, felt a sharp pang at his emphasis that it wouldn't be real. And what would this arrangement entail exactly? She heard herself ask. Marriage in name only. You'd keep your room, I'd keep sleeping in the barn. Nothing would change except the paperwork. His voice was carefully neutral. You'd be free to leave if you wanted, once this situation with Blackwell is resolved. No obligations beyond caring for Josie, which you're already doing. I see. Marion struggled to sort through her tangled emotions. And you think this would actually help? I think it would make it much harder for them to remove Josie. A child with two parents, even if one is a step-parent, is better than a child with one parent and a governess of questionable morals. He finally looked at her, his expression guarded. But I understand if it's too much to ask. You already came here expecting to marry a stranger, and that didn't work out. I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to try again under these circumstances. That's not... Marion stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. Mr. Mercer, this isn't about what I want or don't want. This is about Josie's welfare. If you truly believe this would protect her, then we should consider it seriously. I do believe it would help, but I won't pressure you into anything. His voice softened slightly. You've already given us more than we had any right to expect. I won't ask you to sacrifice more unless you're willing. Marion thought about Josie asleep in the next room, her small hand curled under her cheek. She thought about the sheriff's cold eyes and Blackwell's threats. She thought about the garden they were nurturing back to life, and the way this broken house was slowly becoming a home again. If we did this, she said carefully, it would have to be done properly. A real ceremony, legal documents, everything above board. No room for anyone to claim it's a sham. Agreed. And we'd need to be clear about expectations. You say nothing would change, but marriage changes things whether we want it to or not. We'd need boundaries, agreements, rules. Whatever you think is necessary. Marion took a deep breath. Then yes, if you believe this is what's best for Josie, I'll marry you. The silence that followed felt weighted with significance. Boone's eyes searched her face as if trying to understand what had motivated her agreement. You're sure? I'm sure that protecting Josie is the most important thing. I'm sure that I want to stay here and help this family heal. And I'm sure that if a legal formality will help accomplish that, I'm willing to go through with it. She met his gaze directly. Are you sure, Mr. Mercer? This is a big step, even if it is just a formality. I'm sure. His voice was firm. And Miss Locke? Under the circumstances, you should probably start calling me Boone. Then you should call me Marion. She extended her hand, formal and businesslike. Partners in protecting Josie. He took her hand, his grip warm and calloused. Partners, he agreed. They shook on it like two people closing a business deal, not like a couple agreeing to marry. But as their hands clasped, Marian felt something shift between them. An acknowledgement of trust, perhaps, or a recognition that they were bound together now in ways that went beyond simple employment. When he released her hand, the moment passed, and they were back to practical planning. They would ride to town tomorrow and speak with Reverend Barnes about a quick ceremony. Alice could be a witness, and perhaps her husband, Tom. They'd register the marriage with the county clerk immediately, making everything legal and official. "We should probably tell Josie in the morning," Boone said. "She should hear it from us before anyone else tells her." "How do you think she'll react?" "Honestly, I think she'll be thrilled. She's been hoping for a mother since Clara died, and you're the first person she's truly taken to." A shadow crossed his face. "I just hope we're not setting her up for disappointment when this arrangement eventually ends." "Who says it has to end?" The words were out before Marian could stop them. Boone looked at her sharply. "You said yourself this is about protecting Josie. Once Blackwell's dealt with, Josie will still need care. She'll still benefit from having two parents instead of one. And I'll still need a home and a purpose." Marian lifted her chin. "I'm not planning to leave just because the immediate crisis is over, Boone. Unless you want me to." He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "I don't want you to," he said finally, his voice rough. "I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I know Josie's happier with you here. And I'm managing better too, so no, I don't want you to leave." "Then I won't." Marian smiled slightly. "Partners for the long term, then. However long that turns out to be." "However long that turns out to be," he echoed. They stood together in the lamplight, two people bound by circumstance and necessity, and a growing thread of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Outside, the Montana night pressed close, full of dangers known and unknown. But inside, in this room with its new curtains and remembered furniture, there was warmth and light, and the tentative beginning of hope. Tomorrow they would ride to town and formalize their arrangement. Tomorrow they would face whatever consequences came from their decision. But tonight, for just this moment, they could stand together in companionable silence and believe that maybe, just maybe, they were building something worth protecting. "You should get some rest before your watch," Boone said finally. "It's been a long day." "So should you." Marian moved toward her room, then paused at the doorway. "Boone, thank you for trusting me enough to suggest this. I know it's not easy, given everything you've been through. Thank you for saying yes when you had every reason to refuse." He managed something that might have been a smile. "Good night, Marian." "Good night, Boone." She closed the door softly behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Boone Mercer, stepmother to Josie, wife in name, if not in fact to a man she'd known less than a week. It was mad, impulsive, completely improper by any standard. It was also, she realized as she changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, exactly what she wanted. Not just the protection it would give Josie, or the security it would provide her, but the chance to be part of this family, to help them heal, to belong somewhere and to someone. Even if that someone didn't love her the way she was beginning to suspect she might love him, morning came too quickly, bringing with it the weight of decisions made in lamplight. Marian woke to find Boone already up, the smell of coffee drifting through the house. When she emerged from her room, she found him standing at the stove looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I don't know how to tell her," he admitted without preamble. "How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her father's marrying someone he barely knows for legal protection?" "You don't?" Marian said simply, moving to help him with breakfast. "You tell her that you and I care about each other and want to be a family. Children don't need all the complicated adult reasons. They just need to know they're loved and safe." "But we don't... we're not..." Boone stumbled over the words, his face flushing. "We care about each other enough to want what's best for Josie," Marian said firmly. "That's not a lie. And the rest, well, who knows what the future holds. We're building something here, Boone. Maybe it's not conventional, but it's real." Before he could respond, Josie appeared in the doorway, her hair a wild tangle around her sleep-flushed face. "Why are you both up so early?" She yawned. Is something wrong? Marian and Boone exchanged glances. Then Boone knelt down, bringing himself to his daughter's eye level. Nothing's wrong, baby girl. In fact, something's very right. Come here. Josie patted over, and Boone lifted her onto his knee. Marian sat down beside them, close enough to offer support, but giving father and daughter their moment. Josie, you remember how you asked Miss Marian, if she would be your mommy? Boone's voice was steady, despite the emotion Marian could see in his eyes. You said she couldn't 'cause Mama already was my mommy, Josie replied, her small brow furrowing. That's right. Your mama will always be your mama, and nobody can replace her. Boone took a breath. But Marian could be something else. She could be your new mama, if you'd like that. A second mama, different from the first, but just as important. Josie's eyes went wide. Really? You mean forever? We mean for as long as you need us, Marian said gently, reaching out to take one of Josie's small hands. Your papa and I have decided to get married, which means I'll be your stepmother. I'll take care of you and love you just like I have been, but it'll be official and legal and real. Like in the fairy tales? Josie asked, wonder spreading across her face. With a wedding and everything? Exactly like that, Boone confirmed. We're going to town today to talk to Reverend Barnes, and if you'd like, you can be there when we get married. The squeal of delight that burst from Josie was so loud and pure that both adults winced, but the joy on her face was worth any discomfort. She launched herself at Marian, tiny arms wrapping around her neck with fierce intensity. You're going to be my new mama. I prayed and God sent you, and now you're staying forever. The words tumbled over each other in her excitement. Well, maybe not quite forever, Marian started, but Josie was having none of it. Forever and ever, the child insisted, pulling back to look at Marian's face with absolute certainty. That's how long you'll stay. I just know it. Over Josie's head, Marian met Boone's eyes. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, that this arrangement was already more complicated than either had admitted. Because looking at Josie's joy, feeling her small body trembling with happiness, Marian knew she couldn't walk away even if she wanted to. And the realization that she didn't want to walk away was both terrifying and exhilarating. The ride to town was an adventure for Josie, who sat in front of Boone on his horse while Marian rode the gentler mare they'd saddled for her. The morning was clear and bright, the summer heat not yet oppressive. Josie chattered the entire way, asking questions about weddings and marriages, and whether she could have a new dress for the occasion. We'll see what we can do, Marian promised, already mentally calculating what fabric Alice had brought, and whether she could fashion something appropriate in the time they had. Medicine Creek seemed busier than usual when they arrived, or perhaps Marian was just more aware of the curious stares that followed them. News traveled fast in small towns, and she suspected that everyone already knew about the sheriff's visit and Blackwell's campaign against Boone. Reverend Barnes was in his small office attached to the church, a thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers from his correspondence work. He looked up in surprise when they entered. Boone Mercer, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in church since Clara's funeral. His gaze shifted to Marian and Josie. And you must be Miss Locke. Alice Porter's told me about you. So nothing too scandalous, I hope, Marian said with a slight smile. On the contrary, she spoke highly of your character and your care for young Josie here. The Reverend's expression grew more serious. I also heard about Sheriff Morrison's visit yesterday. Troubling business. That's actually why we're here, Boone said, his hand resting protectively on Josie's shoulder. Miss Locke and I would like to be married as soon as possible. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. Married? That's rather sudden, isn't it? You've only known each other a week. We know each other well enough to know we want to protect Josie and build a stable home, Marian said firmly. And given the circumstances with Mr. Blackwell's harassment, a legal marriage would strengthen our position considerably. Reverend Barnes leaned back in his chair, studying them both carefully. I see. So this is a marriage of convenience, then? A strategic arrangement? It's a marriage built on practical necessity and genuine care for a child's welfare, Marian corrected. Is that so different from many marriages made on the frontier? People marry for all kinds of reasons, Reverend. Love can grow from partnership just as easily as partnership can grow from love. Something in the Reverend's expression softened. You're not wrong about that, Miss Locke. Some of the strongest marriages I've seen started with less promising foundations than yours. He pulled a ledger toward him. Very well. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon if you can find 2 witnesses. But I'll need to be sure this is what you both truly want, not just something you're being pressured into. I want this, Boone said without hesitation. For Josie's sake, yes, but also because Marion's been good for us, good for me. I want her to stay, and marriage is the best way to make that happen. Miss Locke? The Reverend turned to her. Marion thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her father's death, the journey west, Thomas Harrington's untimely passing, that first desperate walk to Boone's ranch. Every wrong turn and disappointment had led her here, to this choice that felt both mad and inevitable. I want this, she said simply. I want to be part of this family. I want to help Josie grow and Boone heal, and I want a home where I belong. Marriage accomplishes all of that. And you understand this is a sacred covenant, not just a legal document, that you'll be bound before God and man? I understand, Marion and Boone said in unison. Reverend Barnes nodded slowly. Then I'll perform the ceremony at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bring your witnesses and wear whatever you'd like to be married in. It doesn't have to be fancy. God cares more about the commitment than the clothes. They left the church to find Alice waiting outside, her arms crossed and her expression knowing. Tom saw you ride in. Figured you might be here to do something either very brave or very foolish. Both probably, Boone admitted. We're getting married this afternoon. Will you and Tom stand as witnesses? Thought you might never ask. Alice's stern expression cracked into a grin. About time, if you ask me. The way you two have been dancing around each other, acting like this is just a business arrangement when anyone with eyes can see there's more to it. Alice, Marion started, but the older woman waved her off. Don't Alice me. I've been married 30 years and I know what the beginning of something real looks like. You can call it whatever you want. Convenience, strategy, protection for Josie. But I saw how you looked at each other yesterday while sewing those curtains. That's not convenience, honey. That's the start of something worth nurturing. Marion felt heat rise in her cheeks, very aware of Boone standing beside her. We're just trying to do what's best for Josie. Of course you are. And what's best for Josie is 2 parents who care about each other and her. You've already got that. The ceremony this afternoon just makes it official. Alice bent down to Josie's level. What do you think, little one? Are you happy about this wedding? I'm the happiest girl in the whole world, Josie declared. Miss Marion's going to be my new mama, and we're going to be a real family. That you are. Alice straightened, her expression turning more serious. You should know Blackwell was in town again this morning. He heard about your plans. Don't ask me how, but word travels. He's making noise about how desperate it all looks, how suspicious. Let him make noise, Boone said flatly. By this evening, Marion will be my legal wife and Josie's legal mother. He can complain all he wants, but he won't have grounds to question the arrangement anymore. There's something else. Alice glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. 3 families have agreed to come forward about Blackwell's harassment. The Johnsons, who left 2 years ago, the Cartwrights, who lost their farm last year, and surprisingly, the Hendersons. Martha finally convinced her husband to speak up. They're willing to testify about the pattern of intimidation and economic sabotage. Hope kindled in Marion's chest. That's wonderful. With multiple testimonies, it's a start, Alice cautioned. But it's also dangerous. Blackwell won't take kindly to people speaking against him. You need to be prepared for him to escalate. We're as prepared as we can be, Boone said grimly, and now we've got legal standing to fight him. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Alice took Marion to her house, where they fashioned a simple but elegant dress from a length of cream-colored muslin Alice had been saving. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown, but with some clever draping and the addition of lace at the collar and cuffs, it looked respectable and even pretty. While they sewed, Alice shared what she knew about marriage on the frontier, practical advice mixed with gentle wisdom. It won't be easy, she said, her needle flying through the fabric. Marriage never is, but especially not one that starts the way yours is starting. You'll have to figure out what you are to each other while everyone watches and judges. I know, Marion said softly, working on the hem. But I'd rather face those challenges with Boone than face anything else without him and Josie. You're already calling him Boone instead of Mr. Mercer, Alice observed with a knowing smile. That's progress. Meanwhile, Boone had taken Josie to the general store, where they purchased a length of ribbon for her hair and a small bouquet of wildflowers. The store owner, a nervous man who clearly wanted no part of the conflict with Blackwell, served them quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact. But as they left, they ran into Sheriff Morrison on the street. The lawman's eyes narrowed when he saw them. Heard you're getting married this afternoon, Mercer. Mighty convenient timing. Timing has nothing to do with convenience, Boone replied evenly, keeping Josie close. I'm marrying a good woman who loves my daughter. That's all that matters. Is it? Or are you just trying to make your arrangement look respectable before the judge reviews my report? The sheriff's smile was unpleasant. Won't work, you know. A hasty marriage to avoid scrutiny looks just as suspicious as an unmarried woman in your house. Then it's a good thing we're not getting married to avoid scrutiny. We're getting married because we want to be a family. Boone's voice hardened. And unless you've got actual business with me, Sheriff, I'd appreciate you leaving us alone. Oh, I've got business. Silas Blackwell filed another complaint this morning. Says you threatened his life when he came to make you a legitimate business offer. He threatened my daughter. I responded appropriately. That's not how Mr. Blackwell tells it. Says you attacked him unprovoked, nearly broke his leg when you pulled him off his horse. The sheriff crossed his arms. I'm going to need you to come by my office tomorrow and give a statement. And if I don't like what I hear, I might have to bring you in on assault charges. Boone's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. I'll come by tomorrow. With my wife. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to get to. He walked away before the sheriff could respond, Josie's hand tight in his. But Marion, watching from Alice's window across the street, saw the tension in his shoulders and knew the encounter had shaken him more than he'd let on. By 2 o'clock, they were all gathered in the small church. Reverend Barnes stood before the simple altar, his Bible open. Alice and Tom Porter served as witnesses, both dressed in their Sunday best. Josie sat in the front pew, her new ribbon shining in her freshly braided hair, clutching her bouquet of wildflowers like treasure. Marion stood beside Boone, acutely aware of how strange this moment was. A week ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach expecting to marry a man she'd never met. Now she was marrying a different stranger, for different reasons, with no idea how this story would end. But when Boone turned to look at her, something in his expression steadied her nerves. He was as uncertain as she was, as overwhelmed by the speed of events. But he was here, present and committed, willing to take this leap for his daughter, and maybe, just maybe, for himself too. Dearly beloved, Reverend Barnes began, his voice resonating in the quiet church, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Boone Mercer and Marion Locke in holy matrimony. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words feeling both weighty and surreal. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected, Marion half expected the doors to burst open and Blackwell to storm in with some new accusation. But the church remained peaceful, filled only with their small group and shafts of afternoon sunlight through the windows. Do you, Boone Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Boone's voice was firm. I do. And do you, Marion Locke, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Marion looked into Boone's blue-green eyes and saw fear there, yes, but also hope. She thought of Josie's joy this morning, of the garden they were nurturing, of all the small moments that had brought them to this point, and she knew, despite the unconventional circumstances, that she was making the right choice. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Barnes smiled. You may kiss your bride, Boone. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Boone leaned forward slowly, giving Marion time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to pull away. His lips touched hers briefly, gently, a seal on promises made in a future uncertain, but no longer faced alone. When they separated, Josie was bouncing in her pew with barely contained excitement. Are you married now? Are you really truly married? We really truly are, Marion confirmed, her voice slightly breathless. Josie launched herself at them both, wrapping her small arms around as much of their legs as she could reach. Best day ever, she declared. Best day in my whole life. Alice dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Tom grinned broadly. Reverend Barnes produced the marriage certificate, which they all signed. Marion's new name looking strange and official on the paper. Mrs. Marion Mercer. A person who hadn't existed an hour ago, but who now had legal standing and purpose. They celebrated with a simple meal at the hotel restaurant, one of the few public establishments in Medicine Creek that hadn't yet chosen sides in the conflict with Blackwell. Josie was the center of attention, telling anyone who would listen about her new mama and the wedding. Her joy was infectious, making even strangers smile despite the tensions running through the town. But as they prepared to ride home in the late afternoon, a commotion near the sheriff's office drew their attention. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in argument. Boone tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "Stay here with Josie," he told Marion, starting toward the disturbance. "Not a chance," Marion replied, taking Josie's hand. "We're a family now, remember? We face things together." They pushed through the crowd to find Martha Henderson confronting Sheriff Morrison, her face red with anger and her voice shaking with emotion. Behind her stood her husband and several other townspeople, including families Marion didn't recognize. The Johnsons and Cartwrights, she guessed. "You can't arrest him for speaking the truth," Martha was shouting. "My son saw what Blackwell did to Tom Harrington's store. He saw the threats, the sabotage." "Your son's testimony is hearsay," the sheriff replied coldly. "And if you keep making false accusations against a respected citizen, I'll have to bring you in for slander." "It's not slander if it's true." One of the Johnsons stepped forward, a weathered man with fury in his eyes. "Blackwell ran us off our land with his tactics, killed half our livestock, poisoned our well, then offered to buy us out at a fraction of what the property was worth. When we refused, things got worse until we had no choice but to leave." "You got any proof of these accusations?" the sheriff demanded. "We've got testimonies from 6 families now," Alice announced, stepping forward with a sheaf of papers, all documenting the same pattern of harassment and intimidation, all willing to swear to it before a judge. "The judge is in Blackwell's pocket," someone in the crowd muttered. "Then we'll go to the territorial governor," another voice called out. "This has gone on long enough." The crowd's mood was shifting, anger building like a summer storm. Marion could feel the tension crackling in the air, dangerous and unpredictable. One spark could turn this into violence, and violence would play right into Blackwell's hands. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Wait, everyone, this isn't the way." The crowd turned to look at her, this Eastern woman they barely knew. But she met their gazes steadily, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. Violence and accusations in the street won't solve this. It'll just give Sheriff Morrison an excuse to arrest more of you, which is exactly what Blackwell wants. She looked around at the assembled faces, farmers, merchants, families who'd been pushed to the breaking point. But documentation, testimonies, evidence presented through proper legal channels, that's harder to dismiss or corrupt. "The legal channels are already corrupted," Martha Henderson said bitterly. "The judge, the sheriff, half the town council, they're all beholden to Blackwell's money." "Then we go higher," Marion insisted. "The territorial governor, the federal marshal, newspapers in Helena and beyond. We make this public, too public for even Blackwell to bury. But we do it smart, not hot-headed." "She's right," Tom Porter added his voice to hers. "We've got numbers now, and testimonies. We compile everything into a formal complaint and send copies everywhere, to every authority, every newspaper, every official who might listen, make it impossible to ignore." "And in the meantime," someone asked, "we just let Blackwell keep terrorizing people?" "In the meantime, we protect each other," Boone said, moving to stand beside Marion. "We watch each other's properties, share resources, present a united front. Blackwell's power comes from isolating us, making us face him alone. We take that away from him." "Easy for you to say," a voice called out. "You just got yourself a wife to make you look respectable. What about the rest of us? What about the rest of you?" Marion challenged. "You're all here, aren't you? Standing together, speaking up? That's respectability worth more than any marriage certificate. That's courage worth more than any sheriff's approval. The crowd murmured, considering. Then Martha Henderson stepped forward and extended her hand to Marion. You've got spine, Mrs. Mercer. I wasn't sure about you when you first came to town, but you've proven yourself. I'm with you. One by one, others came forward. The Johnsons, the Cartwrights, families Marion didn't even know. They shook hands, made promises to support each other, began organizing watches and patrols. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable as his authority was circumvented by people simply choosing to protect themselves. As the crowd dispersed with new purpose and determination, a rider came galloping down the main street, his horse lathered and his face urgent. He pulled up in front of the group, breathing hard. Fire, he gasped. The Mercer Ranch, smoke rising from the north pasture. I saw it from the ridge. Marion's heart stopped. Boone had already started running for his horse, Marion right behind him with Josie in her arms. Tom and several other men mounted quickly, forming an impromptu firefighting brigade. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of Marion's life, every minute an agony of fear and uncertainty. But when they crested the final rise and saw the property below, the fire wasn't in the north pasture at all. It was much closer. The barn was ablaze, flames licking up the sides of the structure, smoke billowing black against the clear sky. Josie, stay with Alice, Marion commanded as Alice's wagon pulled up behind them. She handed the frightened child over and raced toward the barn with Boone. The horses, Boone was shouting. There are 3 horses in there. He ran toward the burning building, but Marion grabbed his arm. You can't go in there. It's too dangerous. Those horses are everything we have. Without them, we can't work the ranch, can't... Without you, Josie has no father, Marion shouted over the roar of the flames. Let the men help. Don't throw your life away. But even as she spoke, Tom and 2 others were rushing toward the barn, wet cloths over their faces. The barn doors were stuck, warped by heat. It took 3 men to force them open, and then the horses came bursting out in panicked flight, their eyes rolling white with terror. 2 of them ran clear. But the third, Boone's big bay, stumbled, its leg tangled in fallen harness. Without thinking, Boone broke free from Marion's grip and ran back toward the burning barn. Boone, no! Marion screamed, but he was already inside, disappearing into the smoke. Time seemed to stop. The flames grew higher. The barn's roof beginning to collapse in places. Tom and the others were trying to contain the fire's spread, but the barn itself was lost. And Boone was inside. Papa! Josie's scream cut through everything. She'd broken away from Alice and was running toward the barn, her small legs pumping. Marion caught her just in time, lifting her up and holding her tight, even as the child fought against her grip. Your papa will be okay, she said, praying she wasn't lying. He'll be okay, sweetheart. He has to be. Just when Marion thought her heart would break from fear, 2 figures emerged from the smoke. Boone, coughing and stumbling, leading his bay horse. Both were singed and shaking, but alive. Marion ran to them, Josie still in her arms. She wanted to scream at Boone for being so reckless, wanted to hit him for scaring her like that, wanted to kiss him for being alive. Instead, she just stood there trembling as he looked up at her with soot-stained face and eyes bright with emotion. I couldn't let him burn, he said hoarsely, his voice rough from smoke. He was Clara's horse, the last thing she gave me before. I know, Marion said, her own voice breaking. I know, but Boone, you can't. You have to think about Josie, about us. I know. He reached out with one blackened hand and touched her face gently. I know. I'm sorry. The barn continued to burn behind them, the structure collapsing in on itself in showers of sparks. Men formed bucket brigades from the well, more concerned now with keeping the fire from spreading to the house than with saving the barn itself. It was clearly a total loss. As the flames finally died down to smoldering embers and exhausted men sat catching their breath, Sheriff Morrison arrived with Silas Blackwell beside him. Blackwell's face was a mask of false concern, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Terrible tragedy, he said, surveying the destruction. These old barns, they go up so quick. Lucky you got the horses out, Mercer. Could have been much worse. This was no accident, Boone said flatly, still catching his breath. Someone set this fire deliberately. That's quite an accusation, the sheriff said. You got any evidence? The barn was fine this morning. We've been in town all afternoon for... Boone stopped himself, but it was too late. For your hasty wedding, yes, I heard. Blackwell's smile was poison. How convenient that you were away when this happened. No witnesses, no way to prove anything. He turned to the sheriff. Probably an ember from the stove, or maybe lightning. These things happen.
There hasn't been a cloud in the sky all day, Marion said coldly, and we banked the stove carefully this morning. This was arson, Mr. Blackwell, and we all know who's responsible. Careful, Mrs. Mercer. Blackwell's use of her new name was mocking. Slander is a serious offense. Unless you have proof, I'd suggest you keep your accusations to yourself. I have proof, a voice called out. A young man stepped forward from the group of volunteers. Martha Henderson's son, Marion realized. I saw 2 men riding away from here about an hour ago. Recognized one of them as working for you, Mr. Blackwell. Buck Ramsey, the man you hired last month. Buck works for me, that's true, Blackwell said smoothly. But that doesn't mean he was here on my orders. Man's probably got his own reasons for riding this direction. He was carrying a can of lamp oil, the boy continued, his voice shaking but determined. I saw it clear as day, and when he saw me watching, he threatened me, said I'd better keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me. The word of a child against a grown man, the sheriff said dismissively. That won't hold up in any court. Then maybe this will. Alice Porter stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal a charred can with Blackwell Ranch stenciled on the side. Found this in the grass near where the fire started. Must have been dropped in the rush to leave. The sheriff's face went pale. Even Blackwell's composure slipped for just a moment, fury flashing across his features. But he recovered quickly. Anyone could have taken that can from my property. This proves nothing except that someone is trying to frame me. He turned to the sheriff. Unless there's actual evidence and not just wild theories, I believe we're done here. Not quite. Tom Porter stepped forward, along with 5 other men. We'll be swearing out statements about what we saw and heard here today. Young Henderson's testimony about your man Ramsey, the can with your ranch name on it, the fact that this happened right after you threatened Boone in town this morning. I made no threats, Blackwell sputtered. You told him the marriage wouldn't protect him, that there were other ways to make his life difficult, Tom continued calmly. I was standing 3 feet away when you said it. I heard every word. More men stepped forward, adding their voices. They'd all heard Blackwell's veiled threats, had all witnessed his campaign against Boone and others. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable as the testimonies piled up, realizing that this wasn't an isolated incident he could easily dismiss. This is a coordinated attack on my character, Blackwell said, his voice rising. You're all conspiring together to ruin my reputation because you're jealous of my success. Your success built on theft and intimidation, Martha Henderson shot back. We're not jealous, Mr. Blackwell. We're tired. Tired of your bullying, tired of your threats, tired of living in fear. I think, Reverend Barnes said quietly, stepping forward, that what we have here is a community that's finally found its voice. And that voice is saying no more. No more intimidation, no more corruption, no more looking the other way while good people are driven from their homes. The crowd murmured agreement. Even the sheriff seemed to recognize that the tide had turned, that whatever power Blackwell had once wielded through fear was crumbling in the face of united resistance. This isn't over, Blackwell said, his mask finally dropping to reveal the viciousness beneath. You think you've won because you've got a few testimonies and some scorched metal? I own this county. I own the judge, the merchants, half the land for 50 miles. I can crush every one of you if I choose to. Then choose, Boone said, stepping forward despite his exhaustion. Choose to keep fighting, keep threatening, keep destroying. But know this, we'll fight back every time. We'll rebuild every barn you burn, replant every field you poison, stand witness every time you try to run someone off their land. You're one man with money and connections. We're a community with something worth protecting. And in the end, that's stronger than anything you can throw at us. The silence that followed was profound. Then, one by one, people began to speak up, sharing stories of Blackwell's harassment, adding their own testimonies to the growing pile. The sheriff, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quietly began taking notes,
his earlier dismissiveness replaced by careful documentation. Blackwell stood alone in the midst of the crowd, his power evaporating like morning mist. Finally, with a snarl of rage, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving behind a sheriff who now had no choice but to investigate the mounting allegations seriously. As the crowd dispersed, promising to submit formal statements and support each other through whatever retaliation might come, Marion found herself standing with Boone and Josie, looking at the smoking ruins of the barn. They'd lost the structure, some tools, and years' worth of accumulated supplies. But they'd gained something more valuable: a community standing with them, protection in numbers, and the knowledge that they weren't alone. "We'll rebuild," Boone said, his arm coming around Marion's waist as naturally as breathing. "It'll take time and work, but we'll rebuild." "Together," Marion said, leaning into his embrace. "That's what families do." Josie, tired from the excitement and fear of the day, had fallen asleep against Marion's shoulder. Her small face was peaceful, trusting absolutely that the adults in her life would keep her safe. Looking down at her, Marion felt a surge of fierce protectiveness mixed with tender love. "Did you mean what you said?" Boone asked quietly. "About being a family?" "Every word." Marion looked up at him, seeing past the soot and exhaustion to the man beneath, still grieving, still healing, but no longer drowning in sorrow. "This started as an arrangement, yes, but it became something more. At least it did for me." "For me too," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't want to feel this way again. After Clara, I thought I was done with love, with hope, with all of it. But you came along with your stubbornness and your kindness and your refusal to let me wallow, and somehow—" He paused, searching for words. "Somehow you made me remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing." "Boone," Marion breathed, her heart racing, "I know this isn't what you came here for. I know we said this was just practical, just for Josie's sake, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I'm not asking you to love me back. I know that might take time, or might never happen at all, but I needed you to know that this isn't just an arrangement anymore. Not for me." "You foolish man," Marion said, half laughing, half crying. "It was never just an arrangement. Not from the moment Josie asked me to be her mama. Not from the first time you looked at me like I mattered. Not from any of the 1,000 small moments that showed me who you really are beneath all that grief and pride." She stood on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. "I love you, Boone Mercer. I love you and your daughter, and this life we're building together, even if it means burned barns and powerful enemies and 1,000 challenges ahead." The kiss was nothing like their brief peck at the altar. This was real and deep and full of promise, a seal on words spoken and feelings acknowledged. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Josie stirred against Marion's shoulder. "You kissing again?" she murmured sleepily. "Mama and Papa used to kiss lots." "Did they?" Marion asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Uh-huh. Mama said kissing was how grown-ups said, 'I love you,' without words." Josie blinked up at them. "Do you love each other? For real? Not just pretend?" "For real," Boone confirmed, his eyes never leaving Marion's face. "More real than I knew was possible." "Good." Josie yawned and settled back down. "'Cause I love you both too. We're a real family now." "Yes, sweetheart," Marion whispered, holding the child close while Boone's arms wrapped around them both. "We're a real family now." The days that followed were full of hard work and gradual healing. The community came together to help rebuild the barn, with Tom Porter organizing work crews and Alice coordinating meals for the workers. Testimonies against Blackwell were submitted to the territorial governor, and a federal marshal was dispatched to investigate. The corrupt judge suddenly announced his retirement, and Sheriff Morrison, facing his own investigation, became remarkably more cooperative. Blackwell himself left Medicine Creek quietly one night, his empire of intimidation collapsing once people stopped being afraid. He had land and money, but without fear to wield as a weapon, he was just another rancher, and not a particularly successful one at that. The garden thrived under Marion and Josie's care. producing vegetables that graced their table through the summer and into fall. Marion taught Josie her letters, using Clara's old primer and infinite patience. Boone slowly moved his belongings back into the house, into the room he now shared with Marion, husband and wife in truth as well as name. On cool evenings, they would sit together in Clara's rocking chair, Boone in the seat, Marion on his lap, Josie nestled between them, and tell stories or simply exist in comfortable silence. The house filled with life again, with laughter and love and the ordinary magic of a family being a family. One evening in early autumn, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Josie asked a question that had been building for weeks. "Do you think Mama knows about us? About how happy we are?" Boone tensed slightly, but Marion's hand found his and squeezed gently. "I think she knows," Marion said softly. "I think she's glad that you have someone to love you and that your papa isn't so sad anymore. Do you think she minds that you're here instead of her?" "Oh, sweetheart." Marion knelt down beside the rocking chair. "I could never replace your mama, and I would never try. She loved you first and best, and that love lives on in everything you are. But love isn't like pie. It doesn't run out when you share it. You can love the memory of your mama and still love me too. And I think," her voice caught slightly, "I think your mama would be grateful that someone's here to care for you and your papa the way she would have wanted." "I think so too," Josie said, her small voice certain. "I think she sent you, like an angel, but with real person arms for hugging." Over Josie's head, Boone's eyes met Marion's, and the love there was mixed with gratitude and wonder. He'd been so certain he was done with happiness, done with hope. But this woman who'd arrived unchosen, abandoned at a train depot with nowhere to go, had chosen him and his daughter, had chosen to stay when staying was hard, to love when love seemed impossible, to build a family from broken pieces. "I think your mama would have liked Marion very much," Boone said finally, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "And I know she'd be proud of you, Josie girl, of how brave and kind and smart you are." "I'm brave 'cause you're brave and kind 'cause Mama was kind and smart 'cause Miss Marion teaches me letters," Josie announced with the absolute logic of childhood. "Exactly right," Marion agreed, standing and pulling them both up with her. "Now, how about we make that apple pie we talked about? I think we've earned something sweet." As they moved into the house, Josie skipping ahead, Boone's hand warm in hers, Marion paused to look back at the land spreading before them, the garden with its neat rows, the new barn rising where the old one had burned, the mountains in the distance, purple against the fading light. She'd come to Montana expecting one story and found herself living another, better, truer, more real than anything she could have planned. The mail-order bride who'd arrived unchosen had become the mother and wife and partner that this family needed. Not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through showing up every day, through choosing love when fear would have been easier, through building a home one moment at a time. "Coming," Boone called from the doorway, lamplight spilling out around him and Josie. "Coming," Marion replied, her heart full to bursting. She was home. Not the home she'd expected or planned for, but the one she was meant for all along. And that made all the difference. Inside, the stove was warm and supper waited, and a little girl's laughter filled the spaces that grief had once claimed. Outside, the Montana night settled over the land, peaceful and full of promise. And in that space between darkness and light, a family, chosen, hard-won, and deeply loved, began the rest of their story together. The mail-order bride who no one wanted had become the mother, wife, and partner they all needed. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.